Anna Smith,
Here.
Sade Vashakun, Nikosi Nelson,
Here.
Trish Bodie, Paul Gautier, Gloria Gonzalez de la Kia,
Here.
Laura Marquez,
Here. It is 6:17 p.m. and with a quorum of the board present, I call this meeting of the Leander ISD Board of Trustees to order. Tonight we have no citizen comments, so we're going to go straight to 3A. Board members, do you have any motions related to consent agenda items? I'm just trying to keep us on time.
I approve the consent agenda as presented. No, I'm sorry. I move that we approve the consent agenda as presented.
Second. A motion from Gloria, a second from Laura. All in favor? 5 ayes, motion passes. All right, board members, next we're going to go to 4A, the 2026-2027 budget workshop. That's where we're at. We're going to have, let's see where we're at. Give me a second. I'm also don't have it on the right thing. All right. All right, board members, we're going to have Dr. Pape and Ms. Gina present tonight, and y'all are going to take it away. And I believe as board members have questions, you will prompt us. So go, Dr. Clark.
I was just going to orient the board members to a couple of things you've been given in paper format. This document has blue, green, and a little bit of orangish color. A lot of the work that we're going to be showing you tonight in the slides is driven by the resolution that was done by this board on September 30th, I believe, at the board meeting. So we aligned the slides to the different be it resolved statements from that resolution, if you just want to reference that as we go. So it gives you an understanding of how we, that work that was driven by the directives in the resolution. The other, you've probably seen this in electronic format, but this is the levers and commitment document that will be relevant to, I think, like the second or third section of tonight's presentation of how we made decisions around budget reductions related to some of our programs. And then I think this last item is the projection for this end of this fiscal year for the 25-26 year that Gina and Pete may reference. I just wanted to let you guys know what those materials were so you had them as a reference as we went through this.
All right, good evening, Madam President, members of the Board of Trustees, Dr. Clark. Tonight we're here at a budget workshop to kind of walk through the 26-27 budget. We'll also mention the 25-26 because how the 25-26 budget ends kind of is the foundation work for the monies for the budget for the 26-27. Before we jump in, I just want to take a quick second and say this whole effort has been a collaborative effort among central administration, campus leaders, staff surveys. So as now tonight we give you kind of a really high-level overview of it, but just knowing behind the scenes there was a lot of discussion, a lot of feedback, and a lot of input that has gone into these decisions, and we've tried to get as much collaborative and as we've team and our PLC process as we worked to come up with these decisions and to get to the point. And it's been a great opportunity to really an education opportunity both on the finance end to be able to gain an understanding for our staff and how finance works, and then it's been an opportunity for our end as well to learn how the instruction on that instruction lens and how those blend together, and that's it's been unfortunately it's been a great experience. Unfortunately, the circumstances of how we had to go through it isn't ideal, but it's definitely, I think we've all come out better, a greater and broader understanding of how the school district works in our community. So tonight we will start here with our slide on our timeline, just kind of briefly get you up to date here. As we're here tonight, I think we're at a point where we're here to talk about, we're about 85 to 90% of the budget is close to being complete. We've gone through, we'll talk about all this through in the presentation, but we're here to give you where we're at with the budget assumptions that were adopted. We do have a recommendation or a discussion and a potential recommendation for the next board meeting on changing one of those assumptions. And then with that being said, we have compensation and health insurance discussion in April, and that should take us to wrap up this budget process. So I just want to give you the kind of the end game where we're at, and then kind of walk you through where we're going. So the purpose of our presentation tonight, just kind of give you a comprehensive update of 25-26, and then where we stand for 26-27. And then we'll present some really key budget assumptions that have come into play into the budget. And I will turn the time over to Gina to walk us through that portion.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to start with 25-26 because, as Pete said, that's kind of the starting point for how we move forward, decisions that we make and assumptions that we make. So it is important that we kind of, I know I painstakingly went through the 25-26 projections in January. I will try not to make it too painful tonight, but it is important that we understand where we're at and how we got here so that we can consider next steps. So keep that in mind as we go through the next few slides, and then we'll kind of pause and talk about those things. So this document here, this is can y'all hear me okay? Oh, is that better? Okay. Okay, so this document here, you get it every January, starting in January, and it's our projections. This has been collapsed, so we tried to maybe focus on some of the key points, but the attachment is the full detail. So the summary of revenue and expenditures for 25-26 is in your board packet, and so if you have questions or you want to look at details, you have that information. I really just wanted to take the time to talk about what's changed since January. So as y'all know, right before spring break, the TEA came out with some adjustments they were making to some of the formulas, specific to, it's the, oh gosh, the over 65 levy. And most districts, with the change, will see an increase in revenue. We are one of the few districts that are not, and that's because of the way the CADs are calculating the over 65. So one CAD is over-calculating and one was under-calculating, and the impact to Leander ISD is about $3 million less revenue. So we've incorporated that already into this. So it's important to note that because, again, I talked in January about being very conservative, and as we progress through the spring, there are things that are happening. There's either more interest earnings, there was a property value audit funds that have come in. So we've kind of made up that difference. It would have been great not to have to make it up, and then we would have $3 million more. But when I'll remind you that back in January, we were like at $13 million deficit. Now we're closer to 12.2, and that is incorporating those changes that happened right before spring break. So I know I talk about being conservative, but this is why, because it's very volatile and things happen and things are still changing with those formulas and with TEA. And so that's why we are conservative. We have seen some additional expenditure savings. I expect to see more. Again, I am being conservative because I'm watching things and we are a tight budget, and so we have needs. I've talked about the band instruments, the trailer that was destroyed, that wasn't in the budget. Those are things that we have to find and that we have to cover. So when we do, it's taking away from other payroll savings. But we are still moving in the right direction, and I expect that we will continue that path forward as we progress through. Again, with me being conservative, I expect we'll see a lot more savings as we finish the year. Also, right now, we're looking, like I said, $12.2 million deficit is what we're projecting right now for 25-26. It could be a lot lower than that. And I point these things out because I know it seems like it goes up and down, but there's lots of reasons for that. Like, for one, we're still waiting for SHARS funding. If we get that funding, that's $4 million. And Pete's working on that right now, and we expect to get some. That's $4 million more, which means a deficit $4 million less. We're also anticipating, if we have higher ADA, we haven't factored that in because we need to wait to see that. That will produce additional revenue this year. So it's important that we kind of hold back on that. So at the end, we could end up as low as a $5 million deficit. I mean, and that is just the truth. I can't guarantee that because I don't know that we're going to get SHARS, and I don't know those things, and so I don't want to promise things that I don't know can happen, but they are things that could happen. And so just need to understand that when you see things change, those are reasons why. And like the $3 million, that's just a huge swing that we weren't expecting at all. So just keep those things in mind as we kind of move through. Now, this graph is a lot of fun. It's a very interesting graph. I talked to my team, and Becky put this together. She does an amazing job. But we really wanted to look at the history of what typically happens in Leander ISD. What budget parameter have we adopted in the past? And where did we actually end up at the end of the year? So if you look at history, like you look at 21, 22, and that looks like a really high, the board allowed a 5% budget parameter deficit, right? But this was the year for Vader. So I want to remind y'all that it seems like the board adopted, and we did adopt a really high budget deficit, but we had the Vader and we came in like in the green. We came in ahead. We came in right at where we were supposed to be. So we didn't have a large deficit. I think it was about $30 million that we adopted, and that did not happen. So, and then you look at the next couple of years, 22, 23, and 23, 24. The board allowed 4% in 22, 23, and they allowed a 3% budget parameter in 23, 24. Well, when we adopted, we actually didn't even adopt that big of a deficit. We adopted a lower deficit because we didn't need to. But then we came even lower than that. In fact, one year we brought in money. We actually added to fund balance. And the next year, there was maybe a small deficit. And then some of these things are planned because at the end of the year, they'll take money. If we see that there is money and we don't have a deficit or we have funds coming in, we'll purchase one-time things to help the district's needs. So some of those are planned things. I think one year you moved $2 million over to the Empowered Grant or some things. Those things are intentional. So you knew that you were doing those things for a certain purpose, and that's why you may see, a deficit in some years or a small deficit. Now we have the outlier, right, of 24, 25. That is an outlier of what we're seeing historically happen. So this year we went with the 1.5%. That's where we've started because of what we were seeing in 24, 25, and we can't continue to dip into the fund balance, and we totally agree with that. But I do, based off of history, think it is an outlier, and I've said that before. What we're seeing happen this year is going back to what we have historically done. There were some one-time impacts in 24, 25 that caused some of that. Again, the SHARS revenue that we didn't receive, and we did do a one-time payment, still thinking we were going to get SHARS. So there's some compounding issues there that occurred. We've kind of righted all those things and come back in. And again, I do tend to budget conservatively. So I feel like we're back in line with what we've historically done. And I think this graph proves that out, which is why I wanted to show it to you and kind of have that conversation and see how comfortable you are with what you're seeing, and make sure if you have questions, this is where we kind of want to pause. And I think Chris wants to.
Are you ready to go to the next slide?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So I kind of jumped ahead of myself with the materials and didn't talk about what I wanted to say at the beginning. Really, the way this is laid out is we're going to look back historically at how things have been approved from a parameter standpoint, what are our actuals, but then we're going to look kind of where we are right now in our budget process for 26, 27, but then we're going to also look to the future. So those three different views really make a lot of sense to me as we're planning this budget, because we have to look at how we historically perform, what we know might happen next year, and then how will that impact things 3 years from now. That way we make the most informed decisions that we possibly can. We've structured these pauses along the way after we finish each section, so board members at least have time to process or ask any questions. So now that we've gone through this little section about the historical budget performance, is there any discussion of how does that information inform what we do? If you have questions or comments.
So when I first saw this, wow, that's really loud. When I first saw the slide, this is the one that jumped out to me out of all of them. And I think, at least from a governance and board member view, I feel like this year y'all have been very, very intentional at preparing us for this budget this year. We started in September, and I feel like years past, I was just telling Dr. Clark, I had such anxiety over this meeting because of last year's meeting and how it felt coming in. I feel like we were coming in to fight. And I just feel like when I saw this slide, what made me realize is, one, thank y'all for getting this board prepared, but also administration for really being intentional and giving us those board budget updates throughout the year, giving us those little bits of information so it's not just dumped on us at this meeting and we're blindsided and surprised. So I think, to me, going forward, if we can try to follow that practice of giving the board the update little by little, having us come along, just like you did this year, so we can see these, like what our last budget workshop was 2.5 hours, but we can see a productive meeting, and we also can see this up and down to stop because we're gonna be more consistent.
I think this is fabulous. I would love to, as we keep moving forward, just to have a better idea of the factors, to kind of pull this information to where I'm trying to figure out how to say this. When we started, like, if I go back to 2015, we used to have traditionally a large margin between the amount we adopted and the amount we spent. And we would end up putting money into fund balance, which loves savings, but there is a question of like, okay, but we were putting so much in a fund balance and we had needs, right? And so I know that the board was intentional about, hey, we want to not have such a large margin. And I think that's part of our story, because we, that's just important to know, that we spent that long building up fund balance. And it has taken us a shorter amount of time to dip into that fund balance. And so when we're seeing these numbers, I just don't know if that part of that story is actually helpful here. And the other one is, in addition to the fact that we've intentionally tried to reduce that gap, that also means how we approach the numbers is different too. And so when you're talking about being conservative, you have less margin to be off because our margin was larger before. We were, usually we added just an extra padding, I think is the best way to say it. So I would like to see, as we keep moving forward, some of that story.
Okay.
And especially when you see, like you're saying, that Vader, how that looked different, that's because of the Vader. I'm thinking, as we start thinking about property taxes and how M&O can be done, and now what happens to INS, and how, you don't over a levy on INS, and how INS impacts your M&O too, because you can only do so much, and if you do too much, then you have to take out of your. So I just think how those factors are there influence these numbers as well. And I'm not sure how best to do it, but I think as a board, just knowing that history of how much has changed, so we know it's just not an apples to apples comparison.
Trish, it's a really great point. I will say one of the reasons we didn't go a lot further back is because we historically, when you go way back like you're talking about, because I was here then too, we did put a lot into fund balance every year. So we would be maybe adopting a deficit budget, but then putting in, 10 million or something of that nature, or bigger amounts of money. And we did take strides to change that and to close that gap so it wasn't so wide. For instance, major maintenance used to be in general fund budget, and it really skewed the outlook because the intention of maybe building something, if it didn't happen, we had budgeted, let's say $10 million, but only $2 million was used. Things like that were happening consistently, which really blurred, it just didn't make it clear and transparent, so we moved that out, trying to separate that. So we've done a lot of those things. We were also trying to make sure that the payroll was more in line, because for a while, I think that there was, we were seeing younger, say, employees coming in or not as much experience when we were budgeting at a higher, and so we were bringing that back in line, and so we were trying to get the payroll back in line. I would say back when we started, like the 21, 22, that is kind of our practice, at least when I was here. That's when this new practice has started. And so, and again, and I wasn't here for the budgeting for 1 year, but I've kind of gone back to, I audited payroll last year and made sure that it was in line and tried to do some things to make sure it was where it's supposed to be, so that then we could make really good decisions about payroll savings and other things like that. So I feel like the story kind of starts in that 21, 22 kind of moving forward, and we definitely can go back and look at some of the things that you're talking about, but I understand what you're saying, because we added a lot. The story would look very different if we go back another 10 years. You're going to see a lot added to fund balance.
And one thing I want to add, I appreciate those words, but it got to the point to where we were adding money to fund balance, but yet we were saying no to programs and employees and staff, so we're trying to find that sweet spot between the two to know. And our new goal, if you want to call it that, our new goal is to to budget at a point where we end the year, where we're up $1 million or we're down $1 million. We're right in that category,
Correct.
where we're not dipping way into fund balance, and we're not adding millions to fund balance, unless it's intentional. And if there was intentional, we would have those discussions throughout the budget process. But just get to the point, this is the monies that we have, and we want to maximize and allocate every resource that we have for the focus of, the goal of our district is our student outcomes and student achievement, and how do we do that with the more limited resources we have each year. So it's just those discussions. But yeah, back in the day, we built fund balance and it was fabulous, but it got to the point to where you get this crossover where now we're saying no to programs and to meet certain needs, and then you're adding the fund balance at the end of the year, and how do you balance that? So I think we've gone to a point now where we've in a position where we're all on the same page about let's conservative, but let's spend everything you have on a conservative revenue estimate, and then that puts you at the end of the year, you're going to finish plus or minus 1 or 2, and you'll be in good shape and be able to provide the programs or keep the programs that we have, and we're not overcutting or undercutting, or overexpanding. We're very balanced. I think that's where we want to be. That's my interpretation of the board and Dr. Clark and Dr. Grisham, where we want to be. So I think that's our goal. And you'll see that as we go through this presentation and future presentations.
Thank y'all so much. And Gina, I think you actually summed it up when you're saying, look, the story starts for us in 2021. Because there were so many different ways, and this is a different approach to the story, but yet it's still something that we're still working on. Obviously, you had the Vader in there too. So I think that helps me, and maybe our board, as we're thinking about possibly the budget workshop that we're going through now is not going to look anything like previously. You can't necessarily rely on your past history. It's good to know it, but there's a lot of changing factors. So thank you.
Absolutely. That's a great way to sum that up, because there's been so many changes.
Well, I just think from a state funding, the climate is, I think that's what you're referencing, is it's very volatile right now, and things were different in 15, 16, 17, 18, and now the game has changed significantly, but it's still, there's a long story to this for sure. I think there's a factor of what do you add when times are good, so you don't set yourself up for failure when times are not so good, because it's really easy when the money's flowing, and then when it's not, how do you undo all that? And it's painful, so we have to think about that. Now that we've gone through some painful decisions, if we ever do find ourselves back in better times, what do we add,
And I'm going to pass it over to Pete. He's going to talk about some of the revenue generators and the actions that we took in that area.
Can I just make a quick comment before? So this is where a lot of the items in this, Nkosi, this and the program analysis that we sent to you, and I just want to frame this conversation. I definitely do not want to indicate that we don't want to talk about these programs, but we also want to remember that we're focused on budgetary decisions and information tonight, not getting too deep in on programs, although a lot about the programs does inform the budget. So please ask those questions. I just want to tone it to where we are at the right level of discussion so we can make the right decisions.
All right, we'll jump into this next slide here, but just a reminder, like Dr. Clark mentioned, all of our slides are referenced into the resolution. We tried to tie it in there to walk you through exactly what it means, what it's tied to, why the decision was made, and what the guidance was. So we're going to talk about the revenue generators, and then we're going to go through what the expenditure reductions and how all that played through. It's kind of netted by category, so we'll go pretty high level. But definitely, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. So I will give you a heads up on this next slide. This is like the goulash slide. It's just everything on there, okay? So I don't want you to panic on it, because we have the process flow slide of this slide, the next slide after. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this next slide, because there's a lot on this slide. But in a nutshell, I will just quickly tell you this, and then we'll go to the next slide, and you'll see it in a much more better visual manner. But because of the hold harmless piece that we have, and a lot of districts have, it's not just Leander, but in our case, we have some hold harmless. So I'm gonna give you an example of some of the stuff that we've talked about in the past. We've been saying all year that a 1% increase in attendance is $3 million. And for 25, 26, that's absolute true. If we were to go up to 1%, we would have $3 million more in revenue on the budget. Now, this next slide, I kind of walk you through it. Some of the hold harmless, like next year, if we did up 1%, we would go up $3 million. But then we would lose $2.4 million in hold harmless. So there's a volatility factor here in the hold harmless. So at the end of the day, I mean, I know I'm preaching to the choir, right? At the end of the day, attendance is money, but really more importantly, it's instruction time, right? If a student misses 1 day a month, that's 80 hours for the year of instruction time. I mean, that's where the key is. But the way this funding is, we don't get paid unless the student is in the seat or in the campus during attendance time. So that's kind of the unique piece of this, of how the hold harmless works. So in a much more visually pleasant slide, we will talk about this volatility. So we have our state formula, and it generates, we have students go up, students go down, program or whatever happens, it affects the state formulas. It generates less funding. So like in 25, 26, we have less funding, but the district receives hold harmless to kind of help bring us back up, bring us whole, keep us hold harmless. Well, that works great until next year. Formula changes. Maybe we have ADA go up, available school funding increases, or tier 1 adjustments between different programs and student populations make things go up, which is great. But then the next phase is some of the hold harmless protections we had the year prior decrease. And they kind of, in some instances, they completely nullify the increase, and some they just take a portion of that increase away. And we've got some slides coming up, we'll walk you through that. So at the end of the year, I mean, we may say beginning it's a $3 million increase on 1% attendance, and at the end, next year, that 1%, $3 million really turns into $545,000 because the hold harmless is reduced. So, as Gene and I spend a lot of time, and Becky and Emily work hard on these presentations, we're giving you information and reports. I mean, it's a little wonky. I mean, it is very up and down. And it's, we, like Dean had mentioned, we really do try our best to be as conservative as possible. I'd rather start really ultra conservative and then work my way through as better data is available toward the end of the budget cycle. Because some of these things, we've learned more about the hold harmless protections probably in the last year and a half that we've really ever had to deal with, okay? I mean, really, and I've been in this 25 years, never had to deal with it like this and get hit. It seems like it's negative every time we do get a hit on it, so. We just wanted to show you that this is why a lot of the fluctuations, above and beyond just the normal school funding, the hold harmless is great when it helps you, but when you lose it, it can be deflating a little bit. So we don't want you to be deflated. We just want you to understand this is a factor of why if attendance did go up, it might not mean $3 million anymore because we lose some hold harmless protection.
And just to add to, hold harmless is not going to be there forever. It's likely to go away at some point. The legislature is going to change that. So again, attendance is still the key and the best way to generate revenue, and it's best for students. We can't necessarily count on hold harmless from year to year. I think they talked about taking several away this last year. So I don't think that's going anywhere.
Yeah, the writing's on the wall.
Yeah.
So.
I just had a quick question on that, because sometimes we expect action from them and we don't get it for several cycles, sessions. So I was just wondering regarding that, you had mentioned that some CADs, there was a CAD that went one direction, another went another direction. Is that what the issue is with hold harmless? And is it possible to work with the CADs to make sure that they get it done properly so we don't have this budgeting problem?
We're definitely, Becky is, she's reached out several times and we've talked to several people. I can tell you that I'm not sure that they believe that they're doing it incorrectly. So it's a hard place to be. But I can tell you that I think it's only about 5 CADs or so that negatively impact, that are over calculating that it's going to impact districts negatively. Most districts, or most CADs were under, which means districts are going to see increased funding. And that's just, we just happen to be associated with a CAD that believes their calculation is different. So I made phone calls before. Becky saw this coming months ago and she reached out. She's had phone calls, several. So
Yeah, and I believe the CADs as well, or they're in the process of having meetings with the comptroller's office and TEA to figure out, and that's where TEA made their change, which adversely affected us, but I know they're still having conversation about why were so many CADs able to read and, get whatever information they got and do it differently. So that was, and it wouldn't have been an issue if it was never calculated that way. But when you get your revenue for 2 months, you think you have 3 million more, and then it changes at the last minute. Puts everybody in a tough spot, or tougher spot. So we'll talk about some revenue generators, and just want to talk about some of the things that we have done. And I say we in the broadest sense, have coming into, some of it has been for this year and then going forward into next year. But one is we've really had some great conversations with principals and staff, worked very closely, with HR on doing some things. I know that the next board meeting, I believe the DOI is coming up that will help potentially help with some flexibility on this particular bullet. But career and technical education, as we've talked about many times, that there's like 5 areas that will increase your WADA. Well, one of those is career and technical education. And so, again, I want to reiterate, it's not just because of the increase in funding. We believe that these decisions were made, these programs are great for students and provide students an opportunity to have a robust and broad, understanding or be, of career opportunities and career choices. And I firmly believe that as students have that interest, that helps them stay in school. I mean, that really helps, that gives them that desire to work toward a certification or just go learn something they really enjoy. If it's whatever it is, and that's where I believe career and tech really falls into place. So we worked a lot at increasing those courses, and Dustin and Jamie and them have done yeoman's work on that as well. We've really had some communications. I spoke last night to the P3 group, and one of the high school principals was there, and he took a moment to explain to the group how appreciative he was of. He has a so much better understanding of school funding now. He goes, a year and a half ago, I didn't know anything about this. So I'm from their perspective, they're looking at reducing staff, and well, hey, this class can only have 15 kids in it. We're going to reduce that person first, not realizing the way the funding formula works, that class generates way more funding than 5 other classes, So that has been, again, as I reiterated earlier, it's been a great opportunity for the instruction and finance side to really work together, to really understand how everything works, so we can come up with the best decision from a holistic view. I mean, not just financially driven and not just instructional driven, but both together. So the career and tech has been a huge piece. We've increasing a lot of the courses in next year in 7th and 8th grade. That was a change in House Bill 3 in 2019. That 7th and 8th grade career and tech for high school credit are now see weighted funding. And then again, we're working on getting the high qualified teachers, and we hope the DOI, if that is approved at this next meeting, that will help ensure that our teachers are meeting the requirements. We are receiving weighted funding for those courses. We had some career and tech courses this year. However, there was some issues where the teacher just wasn't certified, and so we didn't receive the funding for it. And we're still offered them, but hopefully that will, in the future, that will get less and less and less, and those courses will be fully funded. As I mentioned earlier, their average daily attendance, Brian Miller, the principals, and all that group has really done a good job of trying to really put an emphasis, and hopefully a happy, joyful emphasis on students attending and reaching out to parents and letting them know how important it is that your student attend school, and not just for the funding piece, but it's for instruction time, and to make sure that they're on grade level and reaching everything. So that is an initiative that they're putting in place. And so far, there's 6 weeks throughout the school year. We just got a report the other day for the first 4. So each of the first 6 weeks are better than they were last year. Now some are 0.1%, some are up to 0.4. I mean, it's not, hey, we'll take whatever, but I mean, we are heading in the right direction. And so that will help us with the funding. A little more in 25, 26 than it will in 26, 27 due to the whole harmless, but it's better for instructional. Open enrollment, we don't have any open enrollment built in to the budget. Just because someone gets a spot or they apply doesn't necessarily mean they're going to show up on August, when we start school. So again, just going with what Gina mentioned earlier, we're going to be more conservative at this point in the game. We're not going to budget for anything at this stage. But the marketing campaign is underway. Application process is open. As of March 5th, we have 65 out-of-district transfers. submitted an application. So again, it's early. This is just starting out for year one. So, but while we anticipate those coming, we don't have them built into the budget for revenue. Some of the things we talked about earlier is sale of land. We don't have any sale of land built into the budget. So if the district were to sell any land in 26, 27, our request or recommendation would be that that money would just go to fund balance or to help replenish the fund balance at that time. And we can have that discussion if we get to the point where we sell land, but we don't have anything built into the budget to sell land. Again, on lease of land, we talked about the potential, but we don't have anything built in the budget. It could provide some modest annual revenue. We don't see it as a game changer, but it could provide some modest revenue depending on what kind of lease is developed in what area and what the market dictates. And we'll address that as needed. But right now it's not. I'll be honest. Right now it's really more on the back burner than the front burner. The facilities rental revenue, we've increased it by 2%. The baseball and softball fields are doing exactly what we thought they would do. I mean, everybody wants to play. Yes, that's huge. And then now, Jeremy and his crew and that piece, they've got the Don 2 Performing Arts Center opened up here a few months back, and that obviously did not get any lease revenue, rental revenue this year, or if it is, it just started. So next year we'll have a full year of that facility. So we believe that's where the 2% increase there. ADSI, or additional days school year, we're looking at potentially, again, sorry, I got ahead of myself, no revenue for 26, 27. This is a new, it's a couple years old program. We've talked about forming a committee to look into this program. One of the requirements are you have to have 175 days of instruction, and now you can do it as a district or you can do it at that specific campus if you only want to do it at 1 or 2 or 3 campuses. So Dr. Clark has brought this forward, and they're starting a committee this year to kind of talk about that for this upcoming, for maybe 27, 28, potentially the tail end of 26, 27, but more likely be 27, 28. We're looking at piloting a campus or 2 and just seeing what's out there. But it's not really additional revenue, but it does cover it pays for itself. So it's not an additional expense. I mean, it is relatively net neutral. I mean, you may get a little more revenue, but it's not going to be an expense on the budget doesn't have revenue to cover it. So. One thing we looked at advertising, buses, scoreboard, campuses. No additional increase in what we have in the 26, 27 budget over what we have in 25, 26. Advertising, you can advertise on school buses. I mean, that is something some districts do. We're getting some proposals at this time. It's not a game changer. I mean, but we'll kind of get an idea what that is. Christine and her group, I made a few calls. Christina's done the rest of the work on that, so we're working on potentially coming up with what it is if we keep it in house, what it is if we find a company that does that for us, and a profit sharing piece, and then we could eventually have a discussion further on about that. If that's something the district feels is worth looking at, if the committee has any the appetite for that, I mean. And so there's other options, but we're kind of right now, like I said earlier, we're going to put everything on the table. That doesn't mean that we make that recommendation, we go forward with it, but we're going to put everything on the table. Some of the revenue generators, so if you take some of the things we have put $1 million in the budget for the special education allotment adjustments that we won't know what it is until September of 2027 for the 26-27 school year. They're not going to let us know until the end of the year. So we hope that is a conservative number, but I have we don't really have a rhyme or reason on that. I mean, the best case scenario we've looked at, we feel pretty confident and conservative that $1 million is there, but to go above that, I would feel would not be prudent. Career and technical education funding increase just under $1 million, and that's just by changing some courses that we're already teaching, adding some courses in replace of different electives, and so that's gets us almost $1 million. And then that 2% that we talked about on the increased facility rental revenue is about $124,000. So those things added up are a little over $2 million. Then the other revenue changes, again, now you decrease what the hold harmless pieces that come into it. You decrease, we went from tier 2 to tier 3 in the fast growth allotment. And we'll probably be in tier 3 a year or 2 more, and then we'll fall out of it because we don't have that growth. It's based on 5 years, looking back 5 years to now. Decrease in school health, we've budgeted 4 million in this current year. We've budgeted 2 million next year. We're just going to be conservative on that one. As Gina mentioned earlier, we're in the process of hopefully getting that 2022 taken care of and working with HSC on that. And then once that's done, that will free up 2023. It's kind of been sitting there because it's on appeal. And then each year goes forward. And I may be off a year on those now that I think about it. I said that a year off, but 23 and 24. Increase in pre-K tuition, increase in interest earnings. So all those things added up are a negative or a decrease of almost just under $1 million. So between the two, it's a net revenue increase of $1.115 million.
So those kind of wraps up the revenue stuff that we've talked about before. We went through everything I think that we promised the board we would look at, and we will continue to look at as we move forward. I'm going to move more into the expenditure side. And so we've talked about this in the past and the projections that PASA gave us and the fact that they kind of changed their baseline. In doing so, the projection for 26-27 is about 600 students less than what they projected for 25-26. So because of that, just because of then your staffing ratios are lower, so you need less FTEs. So we've seen some decreases there and those costs, and that's going to be reflected in as we move forward. We've already HR's calculated those staffing ratios, and we have the FTEs, and we've incorporated that into these projections as we move through this. Also wanted to talk about the early childhood communities. This is not the early childhood center. This is about the communities because we did talk about mitigating factors for campuses that are under 500 students. Also making sure that we were relieving campuses that were really over capacity. So they did make some changes to that. And while we made those changes, it didn't impact those that were under 500. They're very close. Or there's 3 of them that are very close, but they didn't go over the 500. So right now they continue to be in that low enrollment staffing model. Obviously that could change. We don't really know until the kids come because it is pre-K. But we did do that, and we do think that is going to help stabilize the system at least and help those over-enrolled campuses. It's also going to support stronger PLCs so that they can be more collaborative, and then it provides us a greater opportunity to fill those available seats. So we have looked at that, or the pre-K team looked at that in Lauren and took care of that. Okay, this here is just a list. This is a list of everything that we have identified in reductions for the 26-27 year. These are on, Chris pointed it out earlier, or Dr. Clark, sorry, that these are all on the lever. So if you want the detail of kind of the stewardship, staff experience, student experience, they're all correlated with this. This is just simply a list so that I can give you a total, because again, this is kind of budget related. And you can see that we've identified 10.8 million, a little over 10.8 million in reductions for the 26-27 school year. These, again, when we move forward, will be incorporated in the projections that I'm going to show you. So understanding that we incorporated all of this into that. This slide, again, is to do a comparison of what the reductions that we did this year versus the reductions that we've identified for next year by central office, and then, of course, by elementary, middle, and high school levels. The star that you see is to denote that in that number includes enrollment reduction, so we didn't need as many FTEs. So that's incorporated in that. These are not all they're not program reductions. It's not associated with that. It's a combination of the two. It became very complicated to try and separate that out because of the way that we staff. So they're together. So I want to kind of wrap this up and talk about, we did have lots of discussions, meetings, feedback with stakeholders throughout this process. I mean, Pete talked about how collaborative it's been, and that's true. We've met with lots of people. I've learned a lot. I have a lot to learn. And we did talk about changes. We communicated that. We tried to do board updates, the website, and district messaging. You do have the strategic levers tool, and you have the program information and analysis that we tried to align with this as well that's been provided to you. We do not foresee at this time any additional campus reductions this year. We're done with that. I want to be done with that, so I think everybody agrees with me. We're done with that. We're just going to move on. So yeah, I think we've done a great job, but it was a lot of work, and I know it was really hard work. So I'm going to pause because I suspect that Dr. Clark would like for us to pause and kind of think about, we've gone through a lot of information, a lot of revenue stuff, a lot of expenditure, and so this is a kind of a time to pause and give you a chance to ask questions or see if there's additional information that you do need from us or want that we didn't already provide.
So I have a question, slide 18. It's not on the slide, but it has to do with this lever package. So we talk about high school staffing ratios were increased 22-1 to 22.25. You go on the lever thing and it says, second order impact, what follows. So slight increase in class size, need to monitor for classes above 30. Can I get some clarification on what that process looks like?
Absolutely. So we actually implemented this process last year due to our increases. We are meeting the HR, Brian Miller's team with transfers, as well as the area superintendents. We're meeting every other week starting in April through the end of June, and then we start doing it weekly, monitoring enrollment trends. And this year we're adding the component of Dustin Beinecker, and because of his knowledge with master scheduling and cardonics, to really take a close look at how we're using our staffing on campuses, so that if the campuses do show that they have classes that are large and they're using their staff as efficiently as they can, we can make adjustments as we go.
Just to add on to that, do you track the staffing ratios for core classes separately? Because this 22.25 sounds like it's everything, and that includes the small elective classes.
Sure, so let me explain that a little bit as well. So that is just a formula. It is the number of students divided by 22.25 to come up with the number of FTEs. It is not the class size. It is just a student-teacher ratio. And so when you look at class size, you're absolutely right. A teacher has a conference period and a PLC period, so that number automatically jumps up higher. And so we do look at the core. We also look at CTE courses, because depending on safety measures or space, there may be limitations on how big those classes can get. And then, of course, our electives too, and we have those broken up so that we can see all of those different measures. We have within our staffing guidelines recommended ratios, and like we said, if it gets big, then we start looking at what do we need to do differently, whether that's getting some master scheduling support in to be more efficient with the staffing that we've allocated, or if we need to allocate additional staff.
I'm just going to number my questions, so there's not really a whole lot of discussion. My number one is the very most important to me, is that as I was looking at revenue generators, I noticed we had open enrollment, and I think y'all had told us maybe 65, what you have to date. Not the number we want, but like you said, it's the beginning. But one of the things that I was noticing, I was looking at it, is we talked before with PASA, and when we looked at the demographic report, I said, where's those 8,000 kids? We projected 8,000 more students in 2015 to what we'd have today. We looked, and it was those students were in alternate educational, alternate learning environments. They're in micro schools or private schools or home schools or some type of schools. And so what I don't see on our revenue generators is us reaching out to the market that we have right here and our students right here. And so that is, I know something we're working on, but it's not on this list. So that's my number one. And of course, you can feel free to answer what you want, but if you have something. But that was just, I was like, ooh, that's going to be something so important to me, is I want to know, how are the programs, how is the budget helping us bring in more enrollment, right? And of course, how is it helping us achieve the outcomes we did? So item number 2, and it kind of goes along with all of the pieces: sale of land, lease of land, facility rentals. Actually, it doesn't go. Lease of land, facility rentals, and advertising. For all of them, I would like to know, how much is it going to cost to administer these things as well. Because remember, we tried scoreboards, and that was just not an avenue I think we really felt strongly with, and of course love what Leaf's doing with it, but we got out of that for a reason. And so I just want to make sure I understand, if that's a revenue generator, what is the true cost? And then also, what is the true cost? If we're going to talk about sale of land, I do want to know how much did we actually pay for that land versus how much we sell for it. Because if we buy it on bond and we paid over it with interest, then that land costs more than just the initial price. So I want to make sure I understand if that ends up being an avenue we go down.
Trish, can we let them answer the first question really quick?
They can answer the first question. I just don't want them to answer them all. That was my worry. So, do you,
Okay, so are you wanting, okay, so you don't want these answered here? You're
I
just-
don't want, no. I mean, you can answer one, but I don't want you to answer the whole maintenance cost
So
thing.
could we then clarify what you want answered here, and then the rest, could you possibly send in an email or get that information, so that way they're not having to write down questions, we can get a clear understanding
Right.
of what exactly you're asking?
And I don't want, I just want to make sure that we're all, because sometimes it'll be like, oh, did we talk about this as a board?
I know, I just wanna
And so
make
if
sure
the
we're gonna
board's like,
share the mic.
I don't want that, absolutely. And, yeah, so then let me just go through quickly, which is TIA. I don't see it on the list. And so I was wondering where TIA was. And when I looked at the program packet, 100 and how many pages? I'm still wondering, what are the programs that we want on campuses directly? Like, this needs to be on every campus versus we have certain specific campuses. Because I'm going to be looking at what's driving enrollment and what drives our student outcomes. Okay, that's it.
All right, so do you want any of that answered tonight, or?
Sure,
I think we
yes.
should address the marketing question, because it's good for the public to know and the rest of the board members to know, yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, it is kind of disturbing, isn't it, to think that we had a lot of ambition around what open enrollment could do for us, and how much it could change the revenue generation here in Leander ISD. I want to, Christina Hardy, Chief Communications Officer, and SCR is leading the marketing efforts around open enrollment. We're excited about what we've done and what we've established so far, but we are also working with a contracted service that allows us to do precisely what you are asking for, Trish, in terms of the deep dive of really finding the rooftops and finding these lost learners, is what we're calling them, folks, and the differentiation around what that actually looks like. Kids who have never entered our system, and how do we market to them? Kids who have left our system for whatever reason, and how we market to them. Kids that are migrating in and out, really, which is, I call them the least of these, who we really truly need to intentionally try to see what happened there and how we can really pull them back into the fold of some sort of learning environment, whether it's us or someone else. And so I think there's some grand opportunities around that. I think of what we've done over the past several months is sort of a phase one, and I'm anxious to get and kick off a 2.0 of what it means to really intentionally try to see what those relationships look like with those students. I also do want to talk a little bit about scoreboards, just briefly, yes, I think there is some restructuring that we can do in partnership with LEAF, our boosters, and create some overall alignment that can help drive some real true ad generation. It does require manpower, and I'm currently trying to think about how we can best do that well, in honoring the work that needs to be done, but also knowing that it would be worthwhile. And so I think I think all of the, I think we're aligned in mindset around it, and I'm excited about what we could do with it.
I just want to add too that Christina met with the board officers and I 2 days ago, and went into more detail around marketing and the things that she's doing. And I won't answer for the board officers if they want to comment. But then the plan was to just run that information there and see what questions we got, but then offer it to other board members in groups of 2 or 3 so you can have that same information. So I think it'll be very insightful for you. Yeah.
I think it'll answer a lot of questions. I know I was totally geeking out over it, but it's got some good information in there, and I think I'm just ready for y'all to meet and see it, because I think there's a lot of uncertainty, right? It's just what we know. We've never been down this path, but the program that we're using, like, it is pretty, we've talked about this at TASB conferences. You know exactly what I'm talking about, but it's pretty cool to see how you'll be able to find the lost learners. So I'm excited for y'all to see that and then have that conversation back in the boardroom with y'all.
Hey, I'll just jump in real quick on back to question 1. I'm a little behind on my campus visits, but I have seen 4 secondary campuses in the last 2 weeks, and all of them have told me a lot of the tours they're giving, not all of them are from about half of them are actually students that reside in Leander ISD, either that left or never attended and are looking or seeking to come back. So I don't have a number that doesn't really answer your question, but I do want to say that there is interest out there.
No, I think it's a good point because we started this marketing. Steve, we've all talked about Steve Crawford, and he's leading the way on this at 4 Points. But he went after one thing, but he's getting another. But it doesn't matter, really. It's more students, right? I mean, we want more kids in our schools because we know we provide a quality product. So the work is being done. This is a new world for us, and I think that's kind of the challenge. We've talked about this, but it feels like there's been a huge shift in the mindset around we are not just educators now, we're also marketing our product. So, and we have a good product to market.
I was just gonna say, just because I wrote down the same point that Trish made, and it was just at the end of I think we still need to add recruiting in-boundary students to the list. It's fantastic to hear that the work is, but I think like putting on the list will make it real. Yeah.
Real quick, Trish, I just want to go back to your questions. Y'all got those written down. If not, will you please just follow up in an email? I just want to make sure we get those because I know I had the same question about selling land. So I just want to make sure that we got that covered for you.
Awesome. Just real quick, if I could just jump in, as we were talking about enrollment and marketing, and I'm going to highlight the strategic initiatives booklet that you got your updated version tonight in your folder, and there is a lot of detail around the marketing campaign that you will find in here. So while we've talked a little bit about it here, there's a lot more detail in the booklet and where we are in that process. So just wanted to highlight that.
Thank you. I just wanted to briefly mention, I know I talked with you, Dr. Clark, about pre-K ratios, that those were initially in our budget reductions, but that they ended up being cost avoidance more than reduction. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
Yes.
And then I just wanted to add, in terms of the monitoring for class sizes and impact of those class sizes that I mentioned to you as well, that I think it would be helpful for us to do that as well for our pre-K classes, just to make sure that those ratio changes aren't resulting in issues with, academics and behavior and things like that. So.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, and absolutely, we will do that. And Rachel mentioned those meetings, and that is where they're monitoring all of that as that creeps. That's pre-K 3 where the change was, right? Or 4,
Yes, it was
yeah,
pre-K
yeah.
3, but we monitor pre-K through 12 in those meetings.
Mhm.
Board members, any other questions?
The only thing I'm trying to figure out, I don't have the ask, but I know I wonder, like, what is the cumulative impact on the students and the staff? I see the -1s, and I'm like, do you add those up in terms of the total student experience is a -10 with all of these? And so I don't know, but I think what I would love is like almost like the narrative of like the narrative or the avatar around, okay, I'm a student, I'm an elementary school student, and if we take these changes, what's the average experience? What's the average difference that I'm going to, see and observe and experience? And so I'd love maybe just like what's the little avatar of the elementary school student and the staff. What are they going to do differently and experience if we adopt this as a package, in a sense?
I think that's a great question, and I'm looking at Dr. Grissom because she really coordinated putting all this together. I will say the first time you do something, you learn a lot, right? That's kind of what we talked about is how do we align, because each of these is scored by individuals, and so is everybody using the same, so we had to look through it that way. And then I think we learned a lot to your point of how can we do this better. This is a valuable process. Let me say that first of all. Because it forces us, when you have a construct like this, it just forces you to think things through differently. And so we're looking at ways, I don't have an answer for you, but it's just a statement to acknowledge that there is a need to improve this. While it was very valuable, I think we can make it more thorough in how we look at it. Cumulative is an interesting, I like the avatar concept. You can add more because you did it, really.
Well, and I just want to echo that notion of that cumulative effect, because sometimes you can make decisions in isolation. And so make a decision about different programs or different reductions. But when you look at the whole, what does that actually do for the overall experience? So I think that's a great thing for us to look at and enhance this process with.
I think, though, what I'm trying to wrap my head around is how do you do that when our campuses are so different? We have low enrolled model campuses. We have campuses that are not low enrolled. So like you have campuses that offer every single AP course. You have campuses that don't offer an incubator lab. So like how are you able to capture that through this when each of our campuses offer so many different things? So I feel like I don't know, I'm sure y'all will figure it out, but I'm just trying to wrap my head, like how would you do that?
I think you mentioned something earlier, Trish, about the program analysis and marrying these two. They started as separate, and then we were like, why are we doing these separately? They fit together so nicely. So I don't have the answer. I know there is an answer, though. There is a way to do it. The way we're compiling this information, it's good information to keep doing annually. Then there are other things. This is all academic oriented in both of these documents for the most part. What other things have we made reductions in that do impact kids indirectly? Budget reductions in the finance department. We're a learning organization focused on EC through 12 students. Any change we make impacts a student, some of it more directly than other. So we need to start looking beyond just these programs as well. So.
The other piece to add to this that makes it more complicated to give what you're asking for, I think, but not just the differences among campuses, but the difference in the type of student, their enrollment in various programs. I think about our students in special programs, students at Title I campuses. So that also thinking about like what is impact and thinking about like how is it disproportionately impacting certain students in certain programs, that kind of thing, so.
I want to go back to what Anna was saying, because I meant to ask it, and I think Anna said it so much better, is if there's different experiences on campuses, then that makes it a challenge too as we're trying to look at this. And I think, Chris, you started us off talking about, when the money's flowing, we're saying yes to everything, and when we start to have this constriction, if you will, we have to carefully know what are we doing and what are we providing. And so I do want to know, like, what needs to be at every campus versus what ones we're saying don't have to be at every campus. I think being very intentional about that's important as we're getting ready to go through this constriction. But then as we're doing that and all the other programs that we're talking about, what helps drive enrollment to us? And as you said, what really impacts those outcome goals? We as a board said we don't want to see those huge gaps anymore. We want to focus intentionally on math. We want to focus intentionally on reading. We're going to focus intentionally on CCMR. And so it might take a few jumps to get there, but I think there is a direct impact that we can look at these and go, well, this might hurt this, but this is really going to impact our reading or math. But we said that was important. And so as we have to do this constriction, we have to choose. And so I think that's going to be important as we're moving forward. Did I say that right? 'Cause it makes me think of your avatar question, right? It's like another layer.
Yeah, I'd say there are several avatars, and almost imagine, as a choose your own adventure. I'm an elementary school student, and then I'm an elementary school student in a dual language campus. I'm an elementary student with Quest. Some of this is speaking to the community, where they may see this, and they may see, oh my God, and we can provide them with a little assurance that they actually will be getting the same high quality learning. It may look different. You may not get pulled out. If Quest, it may look differently, but here's how we've recover for that. So one is a communication to the community of like, we're paying attention, here's what your experience might look like. And then I've also mentioned, we had a conversation maybe a month or so ago, where I think there's some real opportunities as well. I know this is not a programmatic conversation, but where this challenge has now enabled us to think of something creative where maybe it's like actually a better experience. And so just an opportunity to kind of like articulate that impact as well.
I think you got me thinking just now, Nkosi, is how does our graduate profile and our ICANN statements align to what's here? Like, the work has been done, but how do we align it to what the levers are here so we're not recreating the wheel and whatnot? I still want to make my own avatar, though.
Well, I think this information should be used when we're making tough decisions when money's tight, but it should be used so we're making good decisions when money is, if we ever get back to that day, where we have a little more flexibility in funds. So we add the right things to address the goals that we have and meet the students' needs in the most impactful way possible.
All right, board members, any other questions? All right, Tina, it's all you.
Okay, now it's the exciting stuff. But to me, to the finance geek. Yeah, no, I really am proud of this team and this work that's been done, so I can't wait to show some of this. So, and it may be hard to read up here, which is a little bit disappointing, but this is what we brought you back in January, right? This shows the little over $12 million deficit over the budget parameter that we were tasked with reducing and getting in line there with the 1.5% budget parameter. And so as of today, again, incorporating the revenue generators we talked about, the expenditure reductions we just went through, incorporating all of those things, we are there. So we got, yes, shock and awe. It was a huge task. So, and not just for my team, I'm just saying in general. I worked with a lot of people throughout the district. I worked with Shay, and we moved some things to grant funds. There were some very creative things that we did, working together and talking through, and Becky and Emily analyzing everything. And so a lot of places it may not have been a lot of money, but in the end it was impactful, and it allowed us to get to this place. And so I want to just pause and say thank you to those individuals, everybody that I worked with. I appreciate that. So again, I want to say.
And Gina too, and Pete for sure. Just, we thought we had almost $1 million more to make this up, and then was it the Friday before spring break?
Yeah.
I wasn't even going to Mexico. Gina was going to Mexico, but it was a great spring break because we knew that we were here.
It was,
so.
we were digging, but it's amazing when it happens. It makes you feel really good and very proud of the team and the work that we did. But this is with the 1.5% budget parameter, but it does not include a payroll. I always have to be a downer. I'm up and then I'm down. But it doesn't include a pay increase. But those are the assumptions, right? Again, the total revenue change is about 1.1 million. And then, of course, we have the reductions. Expenditure change is about 11.6, and that's for various reasons, including the 10.8 in reductions. There were other things that we just found that naturally fell out of the budget, and some of the things that I talked about, moving stuff over to grants, allowed us to get to where we needed to be and the things that we promised the board. So do you have any questions about that? I'm going to move on if not. Thank you. So when we're looking at, we can't just look at 26, 27. So this is key in moving forward. We have to look down the road. This is looking at 26, 27, 27, 28, 28, 29. It is with the same assumptions that we are under right now, the current assumptions. It's a 1.5% budget parameter. I did not put any pay increases in any year. I did go through and evaluate for staffing based off of the projections that we have right now, so the best information that we have moving forward, what we would need in 27, 28, what we would need in 28, 29. You're going to notice that there's a huge dip in revenue in 27, 28. Part of that is due to some loss in students. The projections are lower. And unfortunately, because you brought this to my attention at the last meeting, I did go look at the staffing thinking, okay, there's bound to be, we're going to we're going to reduce FTEs. But the fact is, in this scenario, the FTEs, the bubble's going through middle school and high school. And so we're actually adding there, and we're adding at pre-K, but we're K through 5 is what's losing, and it was just basically a wash. So I didn't see a lot of loss in FTEs in that year. But you see the loss in revenue, which is huge. Then also, we're still staffing to open the police department. So we're still adding expenses. Even though we're not growing, we're adding FTEs. We're also preparing to open a campus, so we're adding those FTEs. So that's why you're seeing, then it results in needing to find, I think it's like about $9 million. We're $9 million over that 1.5% budget parameter. Again, with no pay increase. I want to keep pointing that out because I want to be very transparent about what I've included in here. And then if you look down at 28, 29, it doesn't get much worse. It's only and I don't say much worse, but it's only I know, you know what I'm saying? I mean, that sounds terrible, but it's only $2 million more increase in the deficit, but that's because we gain students. So we get students back and we increase the revenue, and it allows us, so anyway, I don't assume any reductions in 27, 28. It's truly like it's just falling forward, but it is something the board needs to be aware of, like where we're at right now. This is not a great picture, but there are things that I do want to talk about as we move forward, and maybe some things that we need to consider that I think we should consider or reconsider in some of our assumptions.
I have a question regarding projected enrollment. So is this using PASA's data that takes into consideration all the new charter schools that are opening and even the availability of voucher dollars? I know that we've seen some, I would say, we've seen some preliminary information about students that reside in our district that have applied for vouchers, but it also includes students that are currently in private schools. That's probably a larger percentage of those students. So is this projected enrollment taking all of those into consideration?
I know that PASA does take that into consideration. I think it's, I guess what I would say is that it's their crystal ball too, like how many are really going to open and when, and how many individuals or students are really going to take part in the vouchers. So, their projections always change every year, and they would reevaluate. So the further you get out, 27, 28, 28, 29, it really is hard from the revenue standpoint, from the projection standpoint, like you're talking about, to know that whether or not these are accurate. It's just the best information that I have right now to go on.
And then just the second point is the recapture number. It's about, I'll just say roughly about 1,500 students. So that's the way I read it, and someone might correct me. So you said we have about 7,500 or 7,700 per student. So I just divided it, and it just seems like for every 1,500 students we get, then we get that much more in revenue, state revenue, and not have to pay back in recapture. Is that correct?
Well, typically what happens is the recapture goes down, which frees up funding for us instead of reducing expenditure. So it may show as increase. You don't get an increase of state funding and a reduction in recapture. You get a reduction in recapture, which shows
That's
as
right.
an
Yeah,
increase.
that's right.
Are there any questions? I'll move on if not. Okay. So now I kind of want to revisit, kind of coming full circle, the budget parameter or payroll savings assumptions. I mentioned this back in January that I really wanted to bring this back around. I wanted to monitor this year's budget, which we have, which is why I started with that. Just to talk about, where can we go from here? Where should we go from here? And what would that look like? What are other opportunities and things that we should do? Again, I don't think we need to make reductions just to make them. So if the budget parameter is too low and we are making up those funds or having that savings, we should consider changing the budget parameter, because you don't want to reduce things because you've arbitrarily put a percent on it that doesn't make sense. So I want to kind of walk through that, and then Pete's going to walk through the other option of generating, recurring revenue, which is going out for a Vader or a voter approval tax ratification election. So we're kind of going to go through those, and we'll pause and ask questions after that. So again, for 25, 26, I keep reiterating the same thing just to make sure everybody's on the same page, but we started with a $20 million deficit. Right now, we are looking at 12 million or less, again, being conservative. And again, I think it could be a lot less than that if we get the SHARs and other things. So the 12 million I truly believe is conservative. And then if you look at the 26-27 school year, the 1.5% budget parameter allows for us to adopt a $6.8 million budget deficit. If you increase that to 3%, then it would be a $13.7 million deficit is what we would adopt. If you wanted to, when we would not do both, so you don't do the budget parameter and payroll savings, it's no. Yes. You could consider, and we absolutely can consider, budgeting payroll at 97% instead of the 98. And so I've listed those as well, what that means. And then now I'm going to show you some scenarios of what that would do depending on what you choose. So again, I wanted to put up so that you can see side by side. Currently, we're budget payroll at 98%, and we have a 1.5% budget parameter, and we are on point. So that's kind of our starting point. So if we budget payroll, instead it's 97% instead of the 98, but we kept the budget parameter at the 1.5%, that creates about a $4 million capacity. Now, say we stay at the 98% for the budgeting the payroll, but we move to a 3% budget parameter, that in itself, it creates about a $6.8 million capacity. So is everybody I just want to make sure everybody's following that, because the next slide is actually going to go into the 3-year. So it's kind of important to see this, and then we're going to look at what it looks like in a 3-year model. Okay. So in this scenario, I have taken the budget, and we're budgeting payroll at 97%, and we've kept the budget parameter at 1.5%. And you can see that, that again, you see the $4 million, and then you see that we have a deficit. Again, there's no pay increase in here or anything else in any year. I've kept that out just to make it easy to read. But you do then have a deficit over the budget parameter in 27, 28, and 28, 29. Now, this next slide is if we budget payroll at 98% and we can increase the budget parameter to 3%. You will still see we still are over the budget parameter, but it's a little over $2 million, which is more manageable, and there are other things that may happen. So this is the trajectory, though. Without truly recurring increased revenue, because of the way the formulas work and because we are not growing in students anymore, it is difficult for us. We're going to continue to have difficulty moving forward, right, with providing increases and things of that nature.
Can you just clarify, you may have done this, I apologize. Using this model right here, 27, 28, that's a $2.6 million difference outside of the parameter, right? So that's the amount we would have to reduce from our budget to be even or within the parameter for that year if everything remained exactly the same.
That's correct.
Nothing changed.
That's
But
correct.
if we do that, that doesn't mean we do another 5 million the next year. If you reduce the
Correct.
2.6 in 27, 28, again, if nothing changes, that 5 million turns into 2.4.
Correct.
Right, yeah.
Correct.
So it's not a combined amount.
No,
Right.
it is not.
That might be obvious to everybody else. It was not to me earlier this week when we talked this through, so.
Okay. So I'm bringing this back around because I just feel like this graph, again, it tells the story. Historically, we have been under the 3%, and budgeting at 3% has been, it's worked for this district. We've consistently seen it, and we're within that. We're going to be within that this year, and probably, again, much lower than that 2% that's on there. So I think we need to look at the history in order to make decisions about next year and how we want to move forward. If we want to be really conservative, then I would argue we'd want to budget payroll maybe the thing with budgeting payroll and the budget parameters, payroll, it doesn't take into account all the savings that we do see in operating. It is strictly looking at your payroll side of it. And we do see savings in operating. And no, we do not spend 100% of those budgets. It just doesn't happen. Plant Services doesn't get all of the projects complete. No campus spends 100% of their funds. They're not overdrawn. So there's a lot, and that adds up. All of that stuff adds up into sometimes several million in savings, $2 to $3, $4 million. You'll see it in travel. When you see it in those sheets, you'll see 2 million, 3 million, and it happens every year. We couldn't reduce that. That's why we do the payroll, because we can select areas that we know typically have vacancies, and we'll make reductions in that area. Does that make sense? Hopefully, I think. And then I'm going to turn it over to Pete. He wants to talk about fund balance because it's fun.
It's the fund balance. So just kind of want to walk you through, if you look at the two options we've talked about, was the 98 to 97% of the payroll, or increasing the 1.5% deficit to 3%. So Gina showed you typically by graph, we come in very well at that 3%. So when we look at this graph right here, we look at the 25-26 projected is at 146 million. So that dipping of 12 million of fund balance, again, that's a conservative number. We think it's going to be lower than that. When we had this conversation 6, 7, 8 months ago, that number was anticipated to be 138 million. Hence, why we looked at the 2 or 1.5 and ended up at a 1.5% threshold, because we knew we couldn't continue to take that amount of money from fund balance. But now that we feel that we are coming in much less than that kind of puts us, that softens the blow a little bit, if you will. And so we wanted to be able to show you that as we go from 158 to 146, again, that's a conservative number. And then we brought you the two options of the 98 to 97 of payroll, or going to the 1.5 to 3%. We feel strongly that increasing the 1.5 to 3% will put us in a position where we will have. It does free up money in the 26, 27, but it also is going to be, by the end of the year, we anticipate to come in at or near break even. We're not telling you, hey, let's do this just so we have it on paper. No, we really feel we're going to end the year at close to break even, or as I said earlier, plus or minus $1 million. And so that gives us a little, some flexibility. Again, it goes back to the discussion earlier about, we don't want to over-reduce. We don't want to cut so much that it causes more harm or more potential for harm than maybe what we've already had to go through. And then a worst case would be to do that, and then, oh, hey, at the end of the year we added $5 million to fund balance. That's a hard pill to swallow, to know you made all these cuts and you maybe couldn't have or shouldn't have. So we feel that at 3%, going to that 3% threshold, we have a solid history. Again, we have that 1 year on the anomaly side, but we have a solid history of coming in at a close to at or break even by the end of that year. So that's kind of one of the recommendations we have tonight, is it give you both options, but we feel better with changing the deficit from 1.5% threshold amount to 3%. But I wanted to show you on how that affects the general fund balance, and why the 1.5% decision was made earlier, or recommended, and then why we are coming to you with a potential change of a recommendation of that assumption going forward. And that is all the fun for the fund balance slide.
And so I am going to continue with just kind of reiterating some things. Pete touched on this, but increasing the budget deficit parameter, I mentioned this, increases capacity about $6.8 million. If we budget payroll at 97%, it creates capacity of about $4 million. Again, this is specific to 26, 27. And then I put, funds could be used to do what? I mean, address staffing needs. We know we've made lots of changes this year that may need to be addressed throughout the year, depending on how that works out. I know we've talked about compensation increases and the need for that. We also health insurance costs are rising, and so we need to think about that. And then other expenses that may align with the strategic plan that need to be considered. But with all of that said, we have to consider sustainability in future years. And I keep bringing that back up because without some changes in legislation or Vader or some other action, it is going to be difficult to give increases and do these things and sustain it without making reductions. So I kind of want to talk through some of that. I put this slide here because I know it's on my mind and it's on y'all's mind about the pay increases and what that cost is associated with each one, whether you give it to all staff, 1%, 2%, or only staff that are not eligible for the TRA. We've talked about these things. I've talked with Rachel, and TASB's, the numbers are coming in line with what I have up here, so they're fairly close. And then, of course, Rachel's coming back in April to give information about the healthcare, so you'll see that plan. And then obviously we're monitoring federal funds all the time, and so we're having meetings with Paige and her team and looking forward in the forward direction to make sure that we're taking all of those things into consideration as well. The next thing I want to show you, and this truly is for illustration purposes only, so I'm going to make that very clear. Very clear, this is not a decision. I have not hired anybody. I'm not giving myself a raise. So if you see the blue line, if you look to the left of that, that is if this is with a 3% budget parameter, the left of the line. That gives you that $6.8 million that I keep referencing. And then I made this assumption. If you look to the right of the line, I made an assumption in 26-27 that we are going to give increases, we are going to hire staff, we're going to spend $6.8 million on recurring costs. I didn't identify what those would be, I just put the 6.8. And this is to show you, by doing that, if you turned around and gave, let's just pretend a 2% pay increase, then you are going to be in a situation in 27-28 where you're needing to make reductions again. And so it's just being strategic and being thoughtful about, while this may create capacity and we can make that 3% up, we need to be very strategic about what we do with those funds moving forward if it's not sustainable things that we're doing, or we don't find a way to generate revenue on a consistent basis. Again, open enrollment, ADA, or other things can impact all of this. We just don't have that information. So this is based on what I know right now. And again, being conservative I don't know that enrollment will be as much as we projected, so things could be worse, but I'm pretending that things are staying exactly as what we've been told. And this is where it lands us. So just want the board to be very aware of that and be very transparent that while we did meet the 1.5 and we're very excited about that, I do believe in the 3% budget parameter. We have to look forward and see the impact of what we do with those funds. And I'm going to pass it over to Pete for more fun.
All right, thank you, Gina. So the key budget considerations I want to talk about briefly is a little bit about Vader and what that would entail and what revenue that would generate. So we've had conversations prior to this about potential having a voter approval tax rate election, Vader, in November of 2026. By statute, you can only have a Vader on uniform election dates, that is in November. We have up to 3 cents on the M&O tax rate, which would generate a net amount of about $6.5 million. We would actually pull in about 13 million, but our recapture would increase about half of that. So we would keep 6.5 million of that. And that's true we have now with the 6 copper pennies that we have now. I mean, that's pretty standard. Makes it a harder sell sometimes, but that's the state formulas that we and every other district has to work with. All of our estimates, running the template and current law, we do not anticipate our M&O maximum compressed rate decreasing any. We got TCAD values the other day, preliminary. They're a decrease of 2.2 in taxable value. We get WCAD on Monday. Becky will be attending that meeting, so we'll have those numbers. I don't expect them to be at TCAD. They'll probably be more in the 0 to plus 2% range, but we'll see. 80% of our value is in Williamson County. So Travis County may be -2, but Williamson can carry, that's 4 times more value in the Williamson County. So depending on what Williamson does, Williamson will be the driver, okay? We'll have those numbers on Monday. And then that's just the preliminary value. The final number we get in July. So if the board does approve a Vader, we would have to do that by August 17th. We would also have to select the firm to conduct the efficiency audit. We have to do that by June 30th if the board decides to go forward with that. There is an exception. That may on the next slide. I'm maybe getting ahead of myself, but let me slip over that real quick. Yeah. So the July 3rd deadline is to select the auditor of efficiency. We had one done back in 2022. It's still posted on the website. There is the bottom bullet there, disaster exception for the efficiency audit, because we have had a declared disaster area in the last 2 years. We could exempt ourselves from that and save the cost of that. If not, we could still do it. We'd still have to select it by July 3rd. August 5th is a deadline for the TA to issue the preliminary maximum compressed rate. Again, we do not anticipate that number changing, hence we don't expect the M&O rate to go down any. August 7th is the last day for districts planning a Vader to publish notice. 17th is the last day to order the Vader and adopt the budget and tax rate. October 2nd is the last day to actually post the efficiency audit results, and we would need probably the end of September. We would come to the board and we would an open meeting and discuss that audit. So we have to post that 30 days prior to the election. The board must hold the open meetings. We do that in September. So November 3rd will be the election day, and then if that Vader were to be successful, our rate would go up 3 cents, and we would be able to keep that $6.5 million in revenue. I'll go back one just to make sure on the last one. So what we talked about, potential, if the board were to approve the Vader and the Vader were to pass, and going back to what Gina had mentioned earlier about being strategic and thinking 1, 2, 3 years ahead. If the Vader, you wouldn't know the Vader would pass until November 3rd. And so if that were to happen, one of the things we talked about was potentially, this was built on the premise of not having much of a raise built into the 26-27 budget, but we could provide a one-time payment of a varying amount. My feet just popped through the curve. Of a varying amount, instead of this being a non-recurring cost, right? So we don't get it till November. We don't know it's true. Then we could do a one-time payment with a portion of that, maybe all, maybe a portion of that, not all of that amount. And then we would have that funds going into the 27-28 budget, and then having some idea of what the session will provide for us. And again, I'm not expecting the session to provide anything on the basic allotment side. Not on the basic allotment side. They're going to say, career tech, SPED, and those areas, they're going to put the carrot out there, and we're going to have a decision, is it worth chasing some of these? And we'll have those when we know what they are. Some will definitely be easy, and some will be a little harder decisions because it may not necessarily align with what we feel is best. And those are the tough decisions that the state likes to put us in sometimes. And so that's kind of just, not without a decision, but it's giving you a heads up of what we're thinking of, trying to minimize the recurring until we really know, A, if it passes, and B, what the session does, so we can be very strategic with the resources that we have and allocate those in a manner that puts us in the best situation to, again, take care of our students. And on the other side, I'd always argue, sometimes I think taking care of our staff is taking care of our students. And so we need to find that balance. We need to find that balance. And we need to be real strategic and focused on it. And again, we're in a tough situation like all districts are. But this is kind of one of the things we just wanted to mention in our minds as we're kind of thinking about what were to happen. And if we were to call that election, how would we could be able to tell the community what we plan on doing and how we're planning on being strategic with that funding. Just sample ballot. In case you have trouble with your vision, the state want to make sure you can read that this is the tax increase. And it would be a 3 cent increase on the M&O side. And then another factor, outside of the Vader is on the debt service fund. What's our capacity, right? Jeremy's starting a conversation or starting a CFAC and starting some conversations about potential upcoming bond and what our facility needs are. And so as of this time, again, not knowing the WCAT values yet, we are in a position to where we can keep our 33 cents and we can sell the remainder, approximately $300 million of the 2023 bond that we still have outstanding. If we were to have any other bond going forward, using very conservative estimates, we believe that we would have to be able to have, we have to increase the INS tax rate as well. So for every 150 million is about a 1 cent increase on the INS tax rate. And again, this is very preliminary information. Once we have the WCAD values, and even those are going to subject to change between now and July, we will have better information, but I want to at least bring it to you today using very conservative, and we'll plug it in with actual. So if we were to need, our bond needs of 450 million, Jeremy might tell you that's probably not going to be enough, but that's, if we were just plugging that, that would probably be a 3 cent increase on the INS side. So we would be potentially looking at a 3 cent increase, asking our community for a 3 cent increase on a Vader, and then up to a 3 cent, based on today's data, on the INS side for a total of 6 cents. So just to give you an idea, using the average home value from prior years, I mean, last year, I don't have, next year's yet, that would be for every 1 cent, that's about $4 a month or increase for your average homeowner. Or home, that's considered a homeowner, it's homesteaded property. So at 6 cents, it would be $24 a month or, $288 a year, depending on how we look at that. Again, that's using last year's number. There's a potential, I know there's talk of the homestead increasing. There's a lot of factors, variables out there that are still in the unknown category. Just using what we know, using current law. Well, it's not the greatest news we've ever heard. I mean, we hope the INS comes in a little differently, but just like I said, I'd rather prepare you for the worst and then come in with better news than prepare you for great news and come in with worst, better, with worst. So that doesn't, I prefer to under-promise and over-deliver, okay? So we're gonna be very conservative, and then as actuals come in, hopefully that we'll have better information and hopefully we'll work a little more in our favor. But the October 14th is our deadline for us for districts holding a bond election to submit all of our pre-election data. And then November 23rd is the deadline for districts holding the bond election to submit our post report. So all this information, but I just want to give you an idea of kind of what we're looking at. You've got a Vader potential and a bond potential. We have not decided the dates yet. We have not brought anything, but we're just early conversations about kind of where this is heading to. I wanted to just give you an update on that information. Our next steps. So again, as I kind of did a really poor job of hinting, because I basically already told you up front, we do recommend that the board adjust the budget parameter to 3% for the 26-27 budget. Again, we showed how historically we end up closing that gap and coming in at break even. As always, the parameter is evaluated on an annual basis. I mean, as you saw in the past, there were a few years that it changed differently based on some specific circumstances, and that was done on a year-by-year basis. Again, we want to really make sure that we avoid making any unnecessary reductions, and then the opportunity to address the district future needs as we really strive to be as strategic as possible as we go through this process and as we strive to go forward. So again, just revisit our budget parameter savings assumptions. This is the 3% or the 97. Our recommendation is going 1.5 to 3%. And then any discussion or questions on the potential Vader. Revised assumption to be requested for, so we plan to revise the assumption we have planned on the April 2nd agenda. We have it both ways. So depending on how the board wants to vote on that night, but we can go either direction, either way on that. Compensation and health insurance presentation is scheduled for April 23rd. Then we continue discussions regarding the Vader. Then public hearing to adopt our budget is scheduled for June 18th. We plan on, as in the past, kind of having the budget finalized to you in the last meeting in May. And then at that point in time, it's adding the paper and it's just come and we approve it on the 18th.
But I was just going to say, I think
that
this
wraps
is our
up the-
opportunity. Yeah, I think that last section, there's a lot of information there, so this is just an opportunity for the board to discuss and ask questions.
This is very much different than last year, I will say. Board members, I know y'all are all taking it in right now. It's a lot, I know it is. And this is not just the only board meeting we're gonna have Just, I need y'all to remember that. Don't try to feel like you have to get all the questions in today and we're not gonna solve all the problems tonight. But this was basically step 2 of a big decision that we're gonna have to make in June. So I'll give y'all some time to think about your thoughts, but if you don't,
I have a
I know
question.
you
I
can
have
go.
a question.
Right?
I just need to clarify the bond capacity. You had indicated that with the current INS 33 cents, we have 300 million left, is that correct?
We have 300 million basically capacity, and that's the amount that we have remaining.
Pete, your thing.
Yeah, you're, at 33 cents, we could handle the 300 million without a tax rate increase, but we have $300 million in bonds we have not sold yet from the 2023 bond. So we'd be able to sell the last portion of the bond from 2023, and that would pretty much take care of that 300 million, so that anything above that would be, as of right now, we expect it to be an increase in the INS tax rate.
And is that increase, does that go to the voters and require a certain threshold, or is it just?
This is with the passage of the bond. That goes to the voters when the bond passes, and the law dictates that the board can adopt a tax rate to pay the annual bond payment, sorry. But we typically would say, we expect it to be a 3-cent increase, yada, yada,
Okay.
based on whatever the
Alright.
amount
Okay.
is, and we would give that information in our bond material.
Okay.
So, let me talk about the Vader first. We'll share the mic. I'll do it in sections. So Vader, last time we went to the community to ask for this, we were reducing INS, moving over reducing the rate so that there was not going to be a tax increase. Just want to confirm that this time around, we are not talking about reducing INS. So does that then mean, because I remember we said we went out to the public for the Vader, and if they didn't adopt it, well, then we're stuck with whatever INS we had. So I just want to make sure I'm understanding the process of how, if we set this rate and it doesn't get adopted, then it's going to revert back to what we have now.
Yeah. If the bond were to be unsuccessful, or we were to not have an election, the rate would be, I anticipate we would adopt a 33-cent rate like we normally have been in the past. If the bond is successful, then the bond authorizes, the bond is successful, that authorizes the 3 cents additional. Now, normally, that wouldn't be effective until the following year, because the election is November. We'd be hard pressed to have a bond sale by, February or March. So the first payment wouldn't be until the following year, and that would be when the rate would go up, the 3 cents.
And then for the Vader's the same thing, right? Same process in a way.
Yeah,
We set a number.
But the Vader
They
goes
don't-
up immediately.
The Vader happens immediately. And then what does this do? Because the legislature was very adamant that they want to make sure that homeowners, a certain number, and right now, because we've looked at so many numbers tonight, I'm not even going to hazard a guess, I know it was over 100,000, would pay nothing in taxes, and that was very important. And it's going to be so important to them, they're going to come back and discuss it again in the 90th. So what does this do to that plan, and what does this do to the fact that if your INS raises over, it impacts your M&Os? I want to know how these levers, because we're in a new environment that we're doing at this time. So can you just tell me, I don't know, the kind of just looking around the corner, what are the potential drawbacks or things we need to be prepared for here?
I anticipate, the governor has made it clear he wants to get to a point where there is no M&O school tax, which there's pros and cons to how that goes. We won't go down that road right now. We may never get out of that rabbit hole at this stage of the game. But strictly on an INS side, there's talk, there's only a couple of things that affect the amount of taxes you pay, and it's your home value, or your taxable value. Let's rephrase that. It's your market value minus any homestead exemption if you have it homesteaded, which gives you your taxable value. So currently the homestead amount is $140,000. I believe the Senate wants to up that another $40,000 to $180,000. I don't know what will be brought forth in next January from on the House side. They're more on the other side of reducing the tax rate. So, and they usually compromise. They go down a little bit on the rate, and they increase the homestead exemption a little bit. So it's a kind of a thing. But those apply to both M&O and the INS rates. So that affects your tax collection. So for homeowners that are, if you're in a home that was valued at $140,000, you wouldn't pay any tax right now. Eventually, if the governor and them have their way with reducing the M&O, no matter what your value was, you wouldn't have an M&O tax. It would all be on the state funding side. But you'd always have the INS side. I want to say always. Be careful on that one. You would still have it. I don't know if that's an issue for them. They want to get rid of that.
Yeah, there is an INS discussion. Let me ask kind of, I know I'm asking thick questions and wanting thin answers. And so let me try to reduce the thickness of the question.
Gotcha.
Make it quicker on this. Right now, the goal is that some people, according to what the legislature wanted to do, would not have to pay any tax. So they're not paying M&O. Later, as we talk about this, I'd like to know how many homeowners does it move into doing something, even if it's minor.
Okay.
It's still property taxes. It's changing a process of they weren't on the rolls and now they are in the calculations. And then the other one later, for like we don't have to have it all answered tonight, is I really do want to delve into the INS discussion just a bit, because I'm curious if this INS gets capped or we're told we can't raise it at certain amounts. How does all this work? Like, what happens if we're in the middle and we've just done this and we're told, never mind, you're going to be capped? And I know probably a few years ago, we'll go, oh, the legislature wouldn't do that. I'm just thinking there's a high potential for that to happen. And I'd just like to know, realistically, what does that mean for us?
Yeah, we'll have to get with the CADs. I mean, we can pull reports, but I can give them, how many properties have zero tax, pay zero tax? We have the information, or we'll have it here in a couple of days, on what the average taxable value is for a home. And in our area, it's probably in the $450,000, range, give or take. But we can find out how many of them do have zero, and that could be for a host of reasons. Their value is just 140 or less. They are completely frozen. They're military, fully disabled. I mean, there's a whole bunch of factors that go into that. We can have them pull a report for us and get that data for us. The INS, the concern I have is, we have the 50-cent rule. We're well under that. And I'm never going to say never, but typically when the community passes a bond, the governing body can adopt a tax rate to pay that bond payment. Now, there may be some interesting things done in there, and they may try to come back and buy that down, and they've done that a little bit with some of their homestead exemptions. They've given you the Asahi and some other, some things of that nature. So it would be speculation, but I can talk to some people that are much more closer to the state legislature than I am about what is out there or what maybe has been thrown around as far as how are some of the ways that they could go about that and what that would mean for governmental entities with INS tax rates.
And I mean, that might all change. We have an election coming up in November, and things might go the opposite way. So who knows, That's the beauty of our Texas legislator. Anyway, Tricia did want to add that next board agenda item is all about INS, operating M&O funds, and voter-approved bonds. So that is our next agenda item. So, board members, any other questions to this agenda item? Okay.
I was just wanting to show the mic. TIA, we talk about teacher and raises, staff raises, and that is important. This board has still, over and over again, we want to talk about employment raises. But the state's been saying, if you really want to do it, TIA is going to be the way we're going to give you this opportunity.
So we're currently looking at TIA.
Yeah.
Even if we were to decide to go that direction, which we certainly could,
Right.
It would be 2 years out before the teachers would see anything.
It takes time,
so-
but it is because right now, the way we're looking at the budget, we're seeing 0% increase, 0% or 2%. And so I think the board's going to want to know, do we have a road for a more sustainable employee increase? And I get
Yes.
TIA has challenges, but
Yes,
it is
and
the one
it isn't everyone. It's a very small percentage of the teachers that qualify.
It is. I have been in several conferences, and there are districts that are offering to help other districts really look at how they open that up. And it depends on how we're scoring or whatever, and I know you've had some of these conversations, but, you know, that's what I want to know is how can we open it up? How do we get it? Because that was what we were talking about, is it only going to be tested? And there's districts that are like, no, we do it without tested. And so
Correct.
there's different, it's not going to be the answer to everything.
Correct.
But if the state is telling us that's where we're going to give you your funds, then I feel like,
Yes, we brought a group of principals and district leaders together and listened to a
That's
2-hour
wonderful.
presentation,
Thank
I
you,
think.
thank you. I love that. I love
And
that.
then got survey feedback from those participants to see what
So
level of interest there would be, and we're looking at that now to look at next steps.
okay. And since I didn't see any of my questions, and my last question is, I was saving it to make sure I didn't hog the mic. Looking at the administration request to go to 3%, kind of curious. Now I'm gonna channel my Nikosi voice here, if I can do it right, which is like, but what do we get at 2%? Or what do we get at 2.5%? Like, what are these differences? What does it look like? And I'm just curious about that, because here's where I'm going, is we just talked about, really, when you look at the start of our budget, we talked about our story, really, we're gonna just look at 2020 as the start of the story. Well, if you looked at the last 1.5 years, I'm gonna say, 18 months or so, remember when we did the whole thing, death by 1,000 cuts? And it was like, well, actually, it's like 2,000 cuts. Actually, it's like a bazillion cuts. Like, it just kept coming. And you just sat there and explained, we had SHARs, healthcare expenses came up, Robin Hood does this, Hold Harmless is doing this, federal funds aren't gonna, I mean, when you think about all the changes we've made to the budget in just the last 18 months, I'm really concerned if we open it too much, that it doesn't help us for some of these aha surprises that have come out of the closet, and they've been very scary. So, can y'all just help me understand that?
Well, I think it goes back to what Dr. Clark mentioned earlier. If we do a 3% and you get 6.8 million, what do you do with that 6 point? Gina gave it a hypothetical, all assumptions that said all salary, but I don't think we would recommend putting all of that into salary, because that is a recurring cost. Now, there is a portion of that, we may have a conversation on a 1% for everybody, which is half of that amount, or 1% for non-TRA and nobody else, and then see if the Vader passes and have those conversations. So it's about how you're strategically with that money. Just because you have it doesn't mean you got to spend it all, or especially, it's one-time thing to spend it on one time, or to spend it on recurring piece, and put it like salary and other things. So we have to be, as Dr. Clark mentioned earlier, we got to be real specific and strategic with what we do, because just because the money, the money flows here for a brief moment, doesn't mean you spend it all in something that's going to keep recurring. You really take that money, you look at, okay, what are our needs, and what is the best way that we can spend this money, and how much of that is going to be recurring, how much of it is going to be one time, so we can be very strategic and not put ourselves in a position where the state can continue to paint us in this corner, where my philosophy is, I want to have as many options as possible, because once you get painted in a corner, no one likes not having options. So, and like you mentioned earlier, it's just a cumulative effect. It's one thing after another. If this was a boxing match, it's just like getting jabbed all night long. There's no knockout punch. You just hit, body blow, head. By like round 7, you just hurt all over. And that's kind of where I feel like we're at in this budget. It's been that way for the last couple of years, and it's like, I wake up and I'm like, I don't even want to think what the legislature can do, because they're going to find something to do, and it's not going to benefit me right now. And it's just, it's frustrating. But I think I just think it's the decisions we make and how we spend those funds, or what we do with those funds, that can be gratefully beneficial to a district, or it can put us in a corner a year or two down the road. And so I want to, and Dr. Clark said we're on the same page. We want to make sure that we minimize that chance. And so those funds would be something that we would come back to the board as we finalize the budget with what we would do with that, and make sure that we're all on the same page, and we would have that tied specifically to the resolution and what we feel is the best way to spend that or use those funds, but not put us in a bind in future years.
So I have a question about the revenue side. So my understanding is, with these levers that you have here, that things like sale of land, Vader, like a lot of these are not considered in that budget, is that correct?
That's
That's
correct.
correct.
And so, trying to figure out how to word this, because I'm still like, it almost seems like we're still, yeah, it almost seems like we're still focusing on expenses that I think we still need to make some kind of commitment to some of these revenue pieces to be more driven towards making those changes rather than really piling on those expenses. We still need to just make some commitments to some of these revenue pieces. So that's just the thought that comes to mind.
And I would say we are committed to a lot of them. Until we can see some of the reality, like the open enrollment, like when we start seeing numbers or we start seeing attendance, the increase, then we could build that in future years. We just don't want to get that again as being conservative. So just to your point, where you're talking about the hits that you take on one side, this is the reason that we're conservative on the other, is because when these things come in and the ADA is higher or something, when we see that increase, it's offsetting these things that happen over here. So it is a balancing act, and that's kind of why we said no. And we can, like the advertising, we can look at some of those things, and we're still looking at and committed to looking at those things. But the reality is, I can't guarantee it right now. And I don't have an amount, and so until I can do that, it's hard for me to make that commitment and guarantee the board that it's going to happen. So I'm trying to balance between both of those worlds, and it's just.
I think my point was really just for us not to lose sight of them.
Yeah, the commitment's there.
Yeah,
Sure.
like the commitment, yeah, that we just don't lose sight of it, like out of sight, out of mind, because it's not in the budget, then we sort of
Oh,
forget
no.
that it's.
I think
No.
what you're saying, Sade, is commitment, not so much to inform the budget or to add to the budget, definitely that, but a commitment to like the real dollars that come from them, so that we have more revenue coming in, not even so much from the planning side, but we would like to end with just more revenue in general, is kind of how I'm interpreting. Yeah.
Yeah, we brought some ideas up, but some of those ideas aren't going to be ready for the adoption of this budget, but we will continue to work on those through the spring and summer and seek ways. And as those come about, we can bring those back to the board as well and build those in future budgets.
I think also to add to that, I'm just gonna, we're a school district, right? We're in the business of educating students, and this whole, trying to find revenue and generate more revenue than what we've normally done is this whole new field, and I feel like it's gonna take us a second with open enrollment. I don't wanna put sponsorships on best, but I'm just one board member, but I do feel like, I guess what I'm trying to look at, I get what you're saying, Sade, I feel like it is a priority to them, but it's like, how do you make money appear when it can't appear, right? And I feel like in probably 2 to 3 years, we're gonna get this down. I mean, charters have been doing this for how long? They have how much money in marketing? They get all these private donations and spend what they want. I mean, our funds are limited, so I feel like they're gonna get us there. I think it's gonna be on us, the resolution, just to make sure we're, in line and getting what we need.
I think we need to be committed to bringing that back. I think things happen sometimes behind the scenes, and we don't necessarily think to update you on, even facility rental increases. We're analyzing it behind the scenes, but we may increase it like we did this year, but we didn't necessarily tell you that because it wasn't significant, and so it was kind of in the back pocket. So we see lots of things like that. Interest earnings, it was higher than and it was significantly higher, but we didn't come back and report on that. So maybe we need to be a little bit more transparent in some of those things, especially if they're making an impact.
I think that would be great, especially as we talk about going to upcoming bonds, right? Here's something, the fields in particular, baseball and softball. I know that was a huge deal. There was someone in my neighborhood. But here's an example where we went and put turf on our fields, right? And look, because of the bond and the actions we took, now we're generating revenue. And I think this is what I get when I talk to other board members. I get the sense that when future bonds, well, what is that building or facility or program or whatever we do for bonds how's that gonna help generate revenue? That's our mindset. I feel like some of us are in right now. So I would love that I know it's extra work, but it's just connecting those dots. It's showing the community, hey, you put trust in us. Now look, we're generating revenue off of this trust. Just, again, connecting those dots.
Go ahead.
You can finish, I have a different
Well,
thought.
I would just to clear, When I mentioned the 300 million capacity, that was 23, 21, and 2017 bond remaining balances are that 300 million. It wasn't just the 23. I was going to save that at the end. No, I got Becky over here saying, hey, so.
They're watching, they're
They are-
always
They are
watching.
making sure we are
Thank
on
you.
Truth
point.
comes out.
Thank you,
I was like,
Becky.
how did I think of that also?
Making sure we're on point, so I didn't mean to interrupt your
I wonder
question,
what
but I
notes
was.
I've got here.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to make sure that I'm clear on that, I didn't want to portray the wrong thing. I just want to be clear on that, so I apologize for interrupting you.
So I'm going to ask this question, but I'm going to preface that I am trying to stay contained to our conversation and not take it down like a program too extensive into programs. But I am wondering about, we hear so much about like, what are we cutting and what are we using to generate revenue? But I know behind the scenes, we're doing a lot in terms of PLCs, MTSS, to try and increase both efficiency for strong academic outcomes, but also a more efficient use of our systems so that we're able to truly meet the needs of students in less restrictive settings that can be more costly, necessary if we need them, but can be more expensive. Look at like special education budget, all these things that I'm thinking about. I'm wondering if there's any way, and this obviously there's not a way to like write this into budget projections or anything like that, but I think it's just good for me to be able to keep in mind if there's any sort of estimate based off of these models about what kind of efficiency they create for a district, how long that takes. Are we seeing any of those efficiencies start to materialize? I'm thinking about, again, PLC, MTSS, and some of the new curriculum that we're piloting. I guess I'm just wondering if, and you don't have to answer this tonight, and it doesn't have to be like super concrete line by line, but I guess I'm just also thinking about not just how we're cutting things, but how are we operating more efficiently from an academic program perspective, and what should we expect that to, obviously there's academic benefits to that, but from the finance side, what should we expect from that?
Yeah, just to clarify, I think I understand, but I'm going to use an example. So we've talked about, and I think it's on the agenda for the next meeting to talk about adoptions for instructional resources. If we adopt off the state-approved list, not Bluebonnet specifically, but it does include Bluebonnet, we have access to IMTA funds, which is another item we've talked about in the past. It's not a revenue generator, but we get access to dollars to, if we buy off that specific list that we normally wouldn't have access to. But then not only that, that doesn't save us, but when you buy those HQIMs, there's less curriculum work. Now, I can't put a dollar amount, and I know you're not asking for that tonight, but because the way those resources are written, we spend a lot on curriculum writing, and there will still be curriculum writing costs, don't get me wrong, but it's going to be much different. I cannot imagine that it would not decrease pretty significantly as we adopt more of those, because they're almost like a written curriculum the way they come. We want to make sure they're quality and they align with our values from a local perspective. That's important. But as we're able to do that, and they're not all bad, and I was set up here and told this board that it was what the state was doing was crazy. I've changed on that, because some of the resources that are coming out of that are not bad resources. Some of them are, but some of them are not. Anyway, I'm getting off topic in the weeds now, but I think is that the type of thing when we use programs from the state, it's kind of what you were talking about earlier, Trish, and get access to dollars, it frees up money and saves us in other places because it's more efficient.
It could be, but I'm also thinking about how the academic audit made some recommendations for improvements on the curriculum. Let's say, for example, are we seeing less referrals for special education when we've implemented some of these changes so that we have less students requiring that high-intensity support, not because
Yes.
they genuinely have improved with tier 2, tier 3, and they don't need special education because we're providing that we're making those improvements to the curriculum.
Yeah,
So-
okay, now I see what you're saying. So that's a whole nother aspect of this, and I would say very, very likely, because, like, we're looking at a phonics resource. And just from my personal experience as an elementary principal in the past, when you get really good at phonics instruction in K1 and 2, your dyslexia referrals go down, which then saves you costs because it costs more to provide the dyslexia program. Plus, it's better for kids because then
Well-
you end up with kids in programs that they really don't need if we had done better from Tier 1 to begin with.
And our program analysis showed that our largest proportion of children in special education are there for a specific learning disability. So I guess I've seen some of the models, like I know back when, like with PBIS, there was like a model where it was like you can expect, and you know, who knows, it's gonna vary district by district, but like efficiency estimates or just anything. I guess I'm just wondering if they're like, yes, we should expect that if we do this the way we're intending to, we do it well, there should be, you know, a % reduction, or just, I don't know, just wondering if there is an expectation that 3 years, 4 years down the line that this could potentially impact the budget. I guess I'm just wondering about it.
And really what comes to mind, and I want to do some research on this and see if there's a way we could calculate something, but because I can't come up with that right this minute. But even going back to the ADSE conversation, if you add 30 days of school to, and again, just whoever's watching this, we have not made that decision. We're not doing that. I'm just saying that is an option, but it is proven. Again, this is a TEA initiative. There's not a lot from them. Usually I'm like, hey, let's do this. But this before budget discussions, I was already talking to Pete about this way back in like November or October, because it has proven to improve the learning for students that typically perform below or don't achieve the same problems we're trying to address through the board goals that we're developing. Does that decrease the amount of money we're spending from a comp ed perspective on tutoring? Does it impact, so there will be efficiencies when we do those things and do them well. And what's even better is they're good for kids.
That's exactly what I'm talking about, is how do we, like, what are the things, I guess I would like for that to be part of the discussion of like, what are we doing that's actually better for kids and saves us money? So that's part of it, because I think that it's really hard just to hear about all the cuts, but there's a lot of really good things happening behind the scenes that I think would be important to include in these discussions that also gives us a little bit of a bright spot for the budget that's not just a cut.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That's really good.
Yeah, one of the points that I brought up, oh, sorry, go ahead.
One plus one to that conversation. I actually wanted to just raise Sade's kind of concern or thought around including something in the revenue, although we may not have 100% confidence. I think in the sense that, we come from a world where like what you measure matters. And it provides a level of motivation and a level of kind of accountability that we know we're committed to it, but it just adds a little extra something. And we're not saying, even if I could imagine a composite $500,000 that's on the board, it doesn't mean we go out and spend that money. But even something that small, like the worst case scenario is the deficit, if we don't hit the number, the deficit increased by $500,000. Like, it's actually not the end of the world. It's not necessarily go out and spend it. It's more on paper of like, this is something we're committed to, and we don't have to be 100% confident, but this composite of revenue generation activities might generate some number that we can strive to achieve potentially. So I just wanted to like plus one. Sade's thinking around that.
Okay, thanks. And, well, I think 65 open enrollment students will get you there, close to that number. But, and we haven't touched on the other items as, yeah. So there was a point similar to what you made. There was a point that I brought up with you because every time we get a taper report, I have my little spreadsheet where I take some numbers that make it make sense to me. And we've been identifying a lot more students for special education, 6% annually, went to 7%, and I didn't check my work correctly this time. I'm not sure if hopefully I checked it correctly, but it was close to 9% and increase. And so if that's correct, and so that kind of goes back to what she's saying. And I did have a chance today, Trish and I, we visited a school and we had a chance to see that new phonics program in progress and how some of that tier 1 instruction can catch some of those students before they get escalated. And so that could be an opportunity. So we might see some of this actually as we get our taper reports, or just we might see some of the staffing needs in certain areas go down.
I just want to put y'all know how to do it, disclaimer. I know the sped rates have gone up, but we have to remember this district was investigated by the Federal Department of Education for participating in a cap and denying students access. I just want to make that clear, because that'll open the door to so many kids, and I just don't want the perception that we're over-identifying students. No, we're capturing kids who actually need services.
Yeah, I mean, rates are going up, not just here. So I think that that's really important to say, and to say that I want to be super clear that I'm not saying we should try not to qualify kids. I think I'm just saying that I think that if there is a way to provide a general education experience that meets the needs of a broader range of students, I think that that's a really good mission regardless. And then we continue to provide the appropriate, free and appropriate education for all students, even if they require a more restrictive setting or a higher level of service. Just want to be clear about that. But I think it's exciting to think about how we can adapt I have been excited to hear about all the work that the admin is doing and the schools are doing and teachers are doing through PLCs to try and really catch needs early and address those. So I just wanted to be clear on that piece too, because I feel very strongly about that.
And I don't know, is it a +2 or is it then 3 total? But I want to build on the things that you're talking about, the revenue generating. Because first of all, I went back to the resolution y'all highlighted for us. I love this. Thank y'all so much. I went back through, I was like, check. Yeah, they did it. And here's where, though, I think I'm landing on, which is on page 2 under revenue generating strategies. And it's the 4th bullet point, which administration shall explore revenue generation opportunities, including but not limited to. So what are our revenue generated opportunities? And then I go back over to page 1, which starts it off. Campus operations and consolidation, 2nd bullet point, says that we're going to develop a process to address high enrollment campuses and low enrollment campuses, including exploring options to mitigate the need to consolidate with criteria designed to protect academic quality and student experience. So I was thinking back over the slides that we saw, and what I still am curious about is if we're looking at approximately 30% possibly of our campuses that are all going to be in that low enrollment model at some point eventually, what are the opportunities we're giving those campuses to help generate enrollment, to bring in students, right? So not just a small staffing model, but what else can they do? How do we mitigate? How do we combine that mitigation and revenue generation together? And I don't know if that's what you are talking about, but I'm hoping that's an extension of what.
So what I'm hearing is that y'all are wanting a board agenda item on this, because it is part of the discussion tonight, but it's not really part of the discussion. It's a separate part of this. So I'm trying to get a feel, are y'all wanting an agenda item on this? And can you give me clarity what y'all are looking for?
On revenue generation, like how we're looking for more enrollment in our low enrolled campuses and overall just as a district. I don't know. I think the marketing kind of goes with that. So I'm not sure.
Can I make a suggestion? Can y'all meet with Christina one-on-one? Because she's going to go through the presentation, because she does go over the marketing piece. That way we're not having to have that same thing. Get with Christina as far as marketing is what you're doing, because I feel like what we saw, Sade and I saw it, Nkosi was virtual. A lot of that information as far as how are we targeting those low enrolled campuses, how are we losing the kids in the north part of the district who are bleeding the most, like she hits that and shows you this. I don't want to say too much without giving it away, but I feel like it's going to answer some of your questions, and then perhaps you can build on that. I'm not saying we don't have an agenda meeting. I feel like y'all need to connect with her first.
Sure.
And then we can kind of go there, because I feel like
Right.
what y'all are asking for is some of the budget, but I feel it also intermixes with some long-range planning as well.
Well, I want to make sure that when the board has an agenda item, that we're focusing on those things we talked about, which is our student outcome goals, our board priorities. But when we're talking about our budget, and we had this outlined, I still feel there's that piece that I'm just not connecting the dots. So we talked about a small staffing model, but we also talked about giving those campuses an opportunity to look at how they're going to deliver, how really can they drive. It's not just necessarily a reduction in staff, but what can we do to support you and think outside of the box? And I just don't know if that conversation has happened yet, or if that's going to.
But I'm thinking of the innovative program committee that Dustin Benneker is organizing, and I think we have a tentative date to bring that information back to the board that might answer some of those in May-ish, I think. I don't want to put you on the spot, but
I think we're
just put you on the spot.
targeting for the end of May, first part of June to bring that back.
That might answer some of it too.
And Trish, to talk about, I understand what you're saying now around the mitigation strategies, and those conversations are certainly happening with our low enrolled campuses. Our team has met with the Steiner Ranch community, Cypress Elementary schools that were identified in that pathway 1, that we really want to concentrate on how we can best benefit them through whatever marketing ideas, whatever collaboration we can do with those school communities, their PTAs, those types of communities, so that we can look more closely at what the uniqueness of their circumstance and how to draw people into the conversation.
I'm hoping that we can have some type of system-wide structure, because what we saw was this swath of enrollment reduction happening, moving throughout the district. And I think we can go and get those students back overall and capture them. But in the meantime, while we're trying to bridge this gap, what can we do to help those schools as they're starting to fall into that area? How do we help them think outside the box, more than just small staff? What could you innovate? What could you do with what you now have?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Board members? All right, board members who have not met with Christina, Dr. Clark will get with you to get you paired up with 2, so you can kind of get a behind-the-scenes look of what we got. I really promise, I feel like it's going to give some questions as far as what we're doing, what's going on behind the scenes. I mean, we don't get to see everything, right? We're up here, but they are doing some good work. Like, I totally was geeking out, and I could probably spend all day looking at that stuff. So with that said, board members, if you have any other questions related to this budget, I need you to please make sure you CC Dr. Clark and Dr. Pape. Remember, please, we've got to include Dr. Clark on all the communication going forward. So I just want to make sure I was clear about that. With that said, we all know what will be on the agenda for the April 2nd, and any other questions, please get with these 2. All right, we're going to take an 11-minute break. So it is 8:33 p.m., and we're going to take an 11-minute break. It is 8:49 PM and the board is now returned back from our break. Board members, we are going to go to 4B, discussion of board adopted resolution statements regarding facilities and asset management impacts on debt service, INS, operating M&O funds, and voter approved bonds. Jeremy is going to lead us in this presentation. Board members, I will ask for you to please let Jeremy get through the presentation, to hold your questions to the end, and then you are more than welcome to ask the questions. Jeremy, take it away.
Thank you, Madam President, members of the board, Dr. Clark, and yes, it's a very long title of what we're doing just because we're trying to cover some pretty important content. And so it's a good transition, though, because we just spent a couple hours just really diving into our operating fund. And I know we talked about some of the INS, but what this is really focused on is going back to the fall. And last fall, there's a resolution that was adopted. The board adopted a resolution. It had many, many statements and goals and priorities included. But what we want to do is make sure that we are aligned administratively and board to make sure that we are having the right framework in evaluating how long-range planning actually impacts both operating and the INS funding, and make sure that we're allocating our resources sustainably. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through a few steps tonight in this presentation as we want to revisit the two resolution statements that we're going to pull out tonight to review with you. And then what we want to do is take those two statements and share with you what administration's interpretation of how those statements can really guide long-range planning as we look forward. And then lastly, we want to make sure that our alignment is we want to confirm that alignment before we apply any of that interpretation to future initiatives. We don't want to get too far out in front of this to make sure that we are doing this lockstep. And so on this slide, you're going to see those two statements that we're going to pull out for you tonight. On the top left, I'm going to read this real quick, but it's administration shall consider the impacts of long-range planning on both debt service, that's your INS rate, and also operating, which is your M&O rate, on those funds to ensure sustainable resource allocation. Okay, that's one statement that we're pulling out. The second statement out of that resolution is administration shall provide an analysis of voter-approved bonds to inform future financial planning and resource allocation. These are two very important statements within that resolution. And what we want to do is just make sure, you can read that differently. We want to make sure we are having the right interpretation. So you'll see here how we're treating these are guardrails. So as we treat them as guardrails, it keeps us aligned and moving forward and not veering too far off that path as we start applying this to future initiatives. So when we look at that first statement, that's the impact on M&O and INS, that first statement ensures that before any initiative advances, we evaluate its impact on both the INS and the operating fund so we don't unintentionally trade short-term opportunity for long-term strain. That means that we need to make sure that it may be a great new thing, it may be a great new program, but we have to understand how we're going to implement it and what are those reoccurring costs and how are all those going to be funded. So when we understand that, we can look at the impact both now and into the future. And then that second statement, the interpretation there is that it ensures that before any initiative advances, voter-approved bond funds, including any potential savings, are analyzed carefully to protect that tax rate stability, preserve capacity for critical replacement needs, and remain aligned with voter intent. And so that, again, is another consideration. As we look at the bonds that we currently have, we always realize some savings. And when we look at those savings, we need to make sure that we protect our capacity that we may need in the future, but also stabilize our tax rate as much as we can. So those are the two kind of interpretations of those statements as they apply to long-range planning when we look at initiatives now and into the future. So we can use those, again, those are guardrails. So when we look at the guardrails, we can actually apply a few lenses across these subjects. So we break the lenses down into three. We have our microscope, that's what's right in front of us. We have the use of voter-approved bond funds. We know what projects are aligned. We know what we need to accomplish. But we also have review potential bond savings and what appropriate uses we may identify for those. So that's right in front of us. What's just outside of that view On the horizon, that's the binoculars. That's looking at what about impacts on our M&O rate in the future? What about impact on bond capacity and our debt service rate? That's a near future, and those are some of the things that we're looking at right now. But then out beyond that horizon is the telescope, and that's the lens where we're looking really into the future. That's the long-range planning. What are some decisions that we may make in the near term, and how does that impact the long-term bond capacity? Because we know that things are going to come up. Needs are going to come up in the future. We know that the 90th session is going to do something. We don't know what it is, but we know it's going to do something that's going to impact how we operate, especially from an INS and bond side. And then consideration of long-term facility replacement needs. And as we enter the CFAC season, a lot of this is pertinent to that conversation. A lot of that is surfacing through those conversations. So that last statement just at the bottom of that slide is that we as administration want to apply these guardrails when we evaluate the initiatives before advancing any recommendations. Right now, we're in the early stages of some of these initiatives. As you see in your monitoring report, we're entering some of that process. But before a recommendation comes before you, we want to make sure we have guardrails in place and we can apply these interpretation of these statements before we bring it to you. So we put it in a format that aligns with our interpretation. So when we look at those initiatives, I mentioned the strategic initiatives monitoring report that's kind of monitoring those major initiatives that we have going on. We want to make sure that we evaluate those, any inclusion in future planning, and how that may impact INS and both the M&O side of it. We need to identify, is that going to strengthen the M&O? It could possibly have a strain on M&O too, because it may have recurring costs. So then I want to pull those out. This is a list of the strategic initiatives that we're undergoing right now, but I want to pull out the first one, and because it's really important, because it does impact actually both. We know that, and it actually ties back to the current bond as well. So we look at the Citizens Facility Advisory Committee. That is a process that we've began. We're in the middle of it. We have subcommittees evaluating projects and going through and gaining context. That impacts a potential 2026 bond. A bond has not been decided on yet. We're in the planning stages, so then that committee can bring forward to you as a board for consideration in August if you want to call a bond or not. But that's what's right on the horizon, and those are the needs that we know right now. But CFAC is always a process that we try to evaluate the needs and tied to a bond. So it's not only a potential 2026 bond, that's even beyond that in the future. So what does it look like contextually? I want to stay on this subject of bond and the CFAC, is that between 2026 and 2035, the district is going to face a pretty large wave of facility modernization. We have a lot of facilities that are going to enter that window. And that's going to require careful stewardship of our operating resources and future bond capacity. So I want to make sure we have that context. And that context starts with what's really going to be in front of you potentially through the CFAC, and that's that we know that 10 campuses will reach the 25-year life cycle for modernization between 2026 and 2030. And so that's representing a significant group of campus modernizations. And knowing that all these modernizations, they require pretty significant capital investment and significant bond funding that's needed. And so these are the campuses that we see that are entering that. We actually have Nauman that's back in '99, so it's kind of even further out of that cycle. And so these are what the CFAC right now is considering, in addition to many more projects. But it's something I want to identify to all of us here tonight. But guess what? That's our first wave. There's actually an even larger storm on the horizon beyond that, because 13 campuses will be reaching that milestone between 2031 and 35. So if we went forward with a bond in 2026, that would take care of that 4 to 5 year cycle. But beyond that is another one coming up. And so this is what happens with the fast growth districts. Eventually, it catches up to you on that cycle, right? And now all of these campuses are coming up for that modernization. You kind of understand where we are with bond cycle that Dr. Poppy represented. And here's a list of those campuses. And some of them you may be like, we're already to the point that we may need to even do a modernization on Vandergrift High School and 4 Points Middle School. That's a surprise to someone, but guess what? It's going to reach an age that's 25 years in the next 10 years. And so it's something that we need to make sure that we understand that's coming on the horizon, because then we can plan better when it comes to long-range planning. So what happens is that all of these modernizations, as they reach the end of their useful life, that equipment needs attention. And bonds are typically the way in which you address that. And if you don't, then something has to fund those. And usually you have to look to your operating fund, which we just went through that exercise, knowing that is becoming more and more limited. So when we look at the things that we've talked about for about a year and a half now, when it comes to just bond capacity, we look at, on the top, these aren't in any certain order, but we look at life cycle replacements. That's kind of mandatory. Our learning environments have to meet a certain standard. And that's not just an aesthetic standard, that's actually just how does it feel and how do they function. A hot classroom is not going to have the same results as a properly conditioned classroom. We don't always have extra rooms to move students around. Safety will always be mandatory, and we know that. Technology will always be mandatory. Our students and our staff need devices in order to learn. But then we look at enrollment change. We know that has evolved, and it's changing. And now we're trying to mitigate that with some of the things that we're putting into place. That's strategic, right? That's not necessarily a mandatory and optional. That's kind of a strategic measure in which we can adjust and we have a little bit of control over. And then lastly, program innovation. That doesn't mean it's not last because it doesn't matter. It just, why we list it there is because it's actually strategic but optional. We have decisions that we have to make around the programs that we may want to see, but we have obligations as well, as you see it on the top. So how do we balance all of this? Because we have initiatives that are tied to program, right? Innovative programming, that focus group that we're going to go through. But then we have CFAC as well. We have our Vandergrift High School feeder pattern and that analysis and going through that. It hits all of these different categories, but they kind of all fall into different priorities when it comes to mandatory. Is it strategic or optional? So we just have to know this and we have to balance it, understanding that all of them have associated costs. So we wanted to represent how do we, when it comes to bond savings, we're gonna start with bond savings, kind of out of order, but we're gonna go start with the bond savings, that second resolution statement. How do we analyze where we are? How do we know we have savings? Are we committing savings too early? So this represents, we call them gates. And I told everyone we call them gates because I can't call them thresholds anymore because we've used thresholds too many times. And so we're using the term gate because as you reach these lines, there is a gate that you have to make sure that to enter the next stage. So we look at project completion risk. When we consider, is the savings within this line item in a bond, could we utilize that for something else, a need that may come up, that we may need to go to the bond oversight committee? We need to make sure that we are at least to a substantially complete stage. Make sure that there's minimal risk in that project, and also that we don't have anything really outstanding that may have a significant impact on that line item. And then we move to the next one. That's contingency sufficiency. We carry contingencies in majority of our projects because we know that something could come up. And we want to make sure that the stage that we are at currently, can we project to the finish line, and do we have the contingencies and the funding in place to get there? And if we are confident that we can get to that finish line, there may be some realized savings that we could reallocate. And then lastly, closeout. It's very similar to contingency. We're projecting out. Have we validated where we're going to be at the finish line? And so a lot of this is variable. It depends on what type of project it is. Jason may know exactly how many laptops he needs. He knows he's locked in that price. It's just a phased in implementation. Otherwise, we may have a modernization to where we may not exactly know variables could change. So these are kind of the gates that we bring anything to the Bond Oversight Committee. We've run them through this. If we're going to reallocate dollars, the example is when we had Vista Ridge High School and Cedar Park High School modernizations, right? Vista Ridge High School, we knew that we could get to the finish line. We had some realized savings, but Cedar Park was going to struggle. And so we were able to go through the Bond Oversight Committee, recommended to this board to reallocate some funds. These are the gates that we went through to make sure that we are confident administratively and as a construction team to make sure we can still follow through with the commitment on those projects. So then we go to the not yet started projects. You'll go through some of these bonds, even back to 2017. You know, the design for High School 10, right? That's something that has not been started yet. There's also some line items in 2023 bond that you may see as well, like the next middle school design. So what happens? How do you consider, what do you do with those projects? We haven't started them yet. We're towards the end of the 2023 bond cycle. And so how would we look at that project that hasn't been started and we're towards the end of the bond cycle? So we look at that again in three gates. One is just the enrollment and strategic alignment. Like what we know, what we knew at the time, which would have been the fall of 2022 in which these projects were identified through CFAC. Has anything changed? Right? Are what we assumed, do they still hold strong? And then the financial readiness. Are the projects, do we have enough funding in those projects to actually implement them? Sometimes they may be held off, and then you get to a point to where can you still afford to implement those projects. And then lastly is the programmatic alternatives. So have the assumptions that program demand, and this is very similar to High School 10 and next middle school, right? That are those assumptions still right? Have things changed? Has enrollment projections changed? And are there other effective alternatives to where those funds could be reallocated? I will tell you that all the bond funds, they kind of remain restricted within the bond it's in to the voter-approved purposes and intent. So one thing, a great example here is if the bond did not include the purchase of land, you can't just go purchase land with that bond. And so some restrictions there that we have to go through and analyze before we can necessarily reallocate those funds through going through the Bond Oversight Committee. And so we have these gates to make sure that we are not making assumptions outside of what the intent was and not reviewing it at a high level to make sure if all of these gates pass, then it advances. That project continues to advance. But if there's questions here, it could be an opportunity to revisit. So that's what happens with the not yet started project. There's not many of these, I'll tell you that. Some of these projects do take quite a long time to implement, even outside of just the bond cycle. Okay, so this is we're going to wrap it up real quick and we'll take questions. So before moving into any further analysis, even looking at these strategic initiatives, what we want to do is we want to get confirmation on two things. Those two things. The first one is, does this interpretation that I shared with you, the interpretation of those statements and those guardrails, does it reflect the board's intent when those resolution statements were developed and when they were adopted? And number two is the level of analysis, kind of this Gates framework that we introduced. Is that appropriate when we evaluate those initiatives that may impact district financial resources, both from an M&O side and also the INS and bond side? Those are really the two confirmations that we would love to get today. The purpose of this was really to get your feedback on our interpretations. And then I have a next step here. A next step because of what we just talked about. Going through those gates, we went to the Bond Oversight Committee. They're actually going to bring a recommendation at the next board meeting about moving. We have several projects within the 2017 bond that we're confident that we can move those funds and reallocate them to your total bond project savings. When you look at your total bond project savings, it's a good resource to go to if critical needs may come up that are unexpected, out of cycle. And so we want to make sure that we reflect that and it's transparent to where we stand on those projects. If they're done, let's reflect that they're done, and let's move that money down to the project savings. So you'll see that it's not done in 2023 bond yet, right? Because as we get to the end of these bonds, we're able to identify some of those savings. In 2017, we're confident that we can do that. So I wanted to set that up because it aligns with the conversation that we are having tonight. And so that's kind of the presentation, just short and sweet, but I know you have questions, and I want to make sure that I can get you as many answers as I can.
Jeremy, thank you so much for that presentation. Board members, I know y'all got questions, so let's share the mic. And who wants to start?
So it does, for your two questions on page 17, from my perspective, I think it does, the interpretation does reflect the intent. Like, we still need to be checking as to the whole intent of the voter intent. However, I have a question regarding number 2, where you say, is this level of analysis appropriate? Like, who would be conducting this analysis? Is it just you, the board, the bond oversight committee, or all of the above?
Yeah, so I would say it could go a couple of different directions, because as a board and administration, we have conversations in this room, especially around strategic initiatives. And as we move through that, at a certain point, there's going to be identified a need that, as a board district, we may want to move forward with. We may not have the exact funding, but that's when we go to the bond oversight committee, right? You say, you're right, that's a directive that you can give administrations. We would like to explore with the bond oversight committee to look at funding this, whatever it is, and then we review that with them. You go to them, get a recommendation from them, and come back to you. So I think that's kind of how the cycle would work. And we would be able to administratively identify, are we confident in releasing those funds, those savings, have they been realized yet? And so I think it's a cyclical, it's going to kind of start with you and it's going to end with you as well.
Would it be fair to say, wow, that was loud all of a sudden, too, that would not look exactly like the levers and commitments document that we had, but it's almost a similar process. These are the things we've agreed that we're going to consider and think through as we move forward or move through these processes. As new bond projects begin, as we look at savings on the backside, that's kind of, and so that's what this process would look like. So it would be administration completing the analysis, but I imagine a report out to the board in some way, especially if we're going to come to them to approve something that the bond oversight committee might approve to bring back to the board. I'm saying this, but I'm asking.
Absolutely. We want to have a framework, right, that we can analyze these both administratively, but also as a board to consider to make sure that we have alignment. I think that's the most important piece. We start here with alignment, and we want to make sure that we end with alignment as well.
So I'll just use one of the, I would say, maybe changes that has happened as an example. So what we had voted on, or what the voters had voted on, was New Hope High School and Leo being in the same building. But that's not a discussion. That was not the discussion when we talked about what to do with the Fabian building. We talked about New Hope and Early College High School, or just New Hope and extending the program.
Yeah.
So I'm just looking at that as an example where there was something that was presented to the voters, but it might not look like that. And it looks like it's a decision that we made. Is that, I mean, that talks about the programmatic need and alternatives and all of that. So it just seems like we made the decision here as a board.
I think you're referring to kind of the repurposing, right? So repurposing projects, you had some specificity in some of them, but not others, right? And as we go through that, I think it's kind of evolved over time as well, right? And some of those needs, and so I think it's a good example, but it also shows how there's some flexibility. Those repurposing were meant to have, there's some autonomy designed within repurposing and the intent behind that from the beginning.
But I think to your question, these directives from the resolution are causing us to form a framework to run things like that through in the future, I would say. That's how I'm kind of interpreting this. That may have not been in place before, but now it is in place. Is that? Yeah.
I would say
not formally anyway.
Yeah, I'd say from a structure standpoint, and that's a great example. Is even as we go forward through repurposing, some of those are not specific, right? And so each time we have a new initiative that comes through, that's an option, an opportunity that we'll have to discuss if that's what those dollars need to be allocated towards.
All right, thank you.
Kind of want to continue maybe in that train of thought for right now, which is like when I'm looking at our 2017 bond, high school 7, we had new construction design only. And then we have later on, right, there was the high school 7 funds and some other bonds. We had some land. At what point does the district come back and say, we're not doing high school? Our high school 7 is now going to be an innovative elementary school. Our high school is going to be a K-8 or a K-12. Or at what point do y'all tell us that? Or is that something that's decided in committee and then we're just going to vote? I mean, I'm trying to, and I think this goes back to some of what Chris was talking about as far as the reporting back.
Yeah.
I think the interpretation, you've got a good start. I like the guardrails, but I do think that reporting back on some of these things is really important to understand where are we at. Are we doing a high school 7? Is that still in our goal? Because from everything I've seen, it's not. What about the middle school 10? I've heard that one is possibly not going to. So if we're going to change that, we went to voters, we told them we were going to build these schools. If we're not, or we're going to change it, or it's going to look a little different, then I really think that's really important to somehow get this in discussions before it just falls out. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it goes to the same thing. When these were developed in 2022, what did it look like? I know a lot of work happened after that, right? To say that I believe based on enrollment projections long-term, then we can at least push high school 7, middle school 10 out a decade beyond. So you have to look at it as a board, as a district. Do we want to hold that money in an existing bond? It's just sitting there. And so that's what's going to be under consideration even on the second it's going to come in front of you, right? So that money can be reallocated to project savings so it can actually be used for something different potentially if we know that need is beyond that decade. It was identified as a need, but circumstances have changed.
Circumstances have changed.
Right.
And I think that's what I'm talking about is what are the projects in here? Circumstances have changed, and I don't just want it to be surprise circumstances have changed. So an example like will be, and this is one of the things that I just a cautionary tale, and for those people who were here, in 2013, I went and got the numbers because my brain's a little fried, but we built a campus for 37 million, we were hit with 37 million budget cut overall at the state, and so we built a campus. It sat empty, and we were holding that open, but we weren't actually able to use it for 3 years. And so I just want to make sure in this environment, what's changed, what hasn't changed, so we're all on the same page.
I think for once, we actually have a long-range plan, and we never had one before.
No, I meant what's changed financially. We were talking about high school 10.
We're planning better. I think that has to be taken into account of this, because I feel like you go look, I mean, the fact that we built that many schools, and if you go look at each of those schools at one point and what their highest enrollment was, I just feel like at one point this board was like, you get a school, you get a school, you get a school. And I mean, we're paying for that outlook that they had. And so I think that's part of it. I do agree with you, the financial piece, but I feel like this district finally has a stable long-range plan that has not existed before. And I think if you look at our past, the way we've the way we've had schools laid out in this district, it supports that. It does.
Well, I think a long-range plan is important. I just want to come back to this list where we have things that are on here that have changed, that we're saying, oh, we're not going to do this anymore. Or, oh, maybe we could innovate and make this different. And I want to know at what point does that come back to us?
What, I think we're gonna see some of that coming at next Thursday on April 2nd, because after it goes through, or it has gone through
It already
the
has
Landover
gone
Sound
through. Correct.
Committee, that because you can't pull these out and then add them back. So you have to be sure, right? When you take them out and
You
move
wanna
them to
be-
savings, it's done. So I know that's not what you're asking, but I think,
Yeah, I just want to make sure I'm clear that do these programs have to go in savings? When you look at high school, I don't know, whatever it is, high school 7.
Yeah.
Does it have to go to bond savings? In an innovation program, did y'all say, oh, well, actually I don't know. Actually, this is an early college, high school. I'm not sure. I'm just wanting to know.
I think putting it
that
in
works.
savings enables us to do other things with it, and that's where we use these criteria. Yes.
Yeah, because you're still aligning with the intent of the bond. One thing is, like with High School 7, that is the design of High School 7, right? That's just getting you to a design. There's no construction associated with that. And so what it does when you go back to project savings, then it allows you to be even more flexible with what you direct it towards and go through the bond oversight committee. You see, that's to where the bond oversight committee says, yes, move that money to project savings. And then the need comes up and it goes back to them. And you say, we want to reallocate the funds for this purpose. So every step of the way, you're explaining the context of why these changes are coming online. Instead of taking a High School 7 line item and then you're going to do this with that line item, you have to change the line item with the money still in there. It kind of resets and recalibrates and gives you a fresher start for anything that may come up new.
So what is the only things that have been on the books for a while are eligible to be thought about of how we're doing forward-looking. So let's say we said, hey, we're gonna put, I don't know, locks on all the doors or something, right? And then we're like, wait, we just did all these digital locks. Well, that's not gonna fall off the bond. What are you gonna do? Or how do you look at the current bond status and the items that are on there? Do they move into savings, or what happens with that? What if elementary's, 30? I think that one's already built, right? What if y'all decided elementary 30 should have been a middle school, a K through 8? When would you have brought that to us?
I think it would be tied to long-range planning. That's something we talked about today. We talked about long-range plan is a good thing. That's a noun. Planning is a verb. So I think long-range planning is just something that we're going to continue to do. We've been in a long time. And if you're kind of staying within the long-range planning mindset, that's what happens is the need comes up and you make pivots and you adjust, but the board and administration are walking alongside each other through that process. And we know when we're ready to say this may need to be something else. Instead of administration saying that needs to be this now, and then surprising everyone. I would hope that we wouldn't be to that point. Hopefully, as we've been doing this long-range plan, and we're going to continue to do it, and with these initiatives, that we would know where we are. And if a change needed to be made, then we would know what the strategy would be to implement that. That may be use bond project savings. We may have enough to do that initiatives, but it also may be something that needs to go into a future bond. So can we wait to the next bond, or do we need to do it now? If we want to do it now, how could we do that, given the funds that we may have available? That's why I think long-range planning is it's kind of continual. It may not be as deep as we have been, but it's something that's always on our mind. And if we stay in that mindset, I think it won't get away from us for what we need.
It's similar to what, go ahead, sorry.
So I just wanted to address just some of the points that have been made. So for example, how schools had been built in the past, even though, yes, it wasn't under a long-range plan, might not have been under a long-range plan framework, but public schools were the only game in town, pretty much. And if there were charter schools, it was like 200, 300 kids. And PASA had their projections 10 years ago, we're supposed to be at 50,000 students right now. All of that has changed. There are monstrosities of like really large charter schools all over the place. Highways have been built to make it easier to get from one spot to the other. So people can hop on, maybe they want to drive to Pflugerville and hop on 130 and get this. So things have changed. The environment is different. And that's why we keep talking about looking within that lens. Legislature has changed. They keep changing things. The INS rule, there was that 50-cent rule, and people had to, the only thing they had at that point was to do caps. And I think that that was what influenced the way M&O was used in the past because of caps. So, but that changed, and then they pivoted to going towards SIBs, which is what we use now. And so I think that we shouldn't lose sight of the external forces that also affect what we do. That's pretty much what I wanted to say.
Wait, say that last thing one more time.
I said I don't think we should lose sight of the external forces and just the environment in which we're operating
Yeah.
that affect what we do.
I think we're kind of doing informally what we just did with the budget, of where we're doing this, looking back, looking at now, and looking to the future. And how do we balance those three things as we make decisions? What's in the past is in the past. It happened. We can't undo those, but we can learn from those things as we make decisions now. And it's constantly changing. To your point, I'm trying to make sense of this for everybody. Of what we're getting at here is, you asked a question: when would we have brought that change to you? That's still hanging in my head. I don't know the answer to that question. But I think if we get this framework and these agreements, this is all about alignment and a reset. We've talked so much about that. I can't go back and make better choices from the historical standpoint. I don't think you're asking me to do that either. But we can get clarity around this. I think that's probably what the board was intending with these statements in the resolution. So we had good information. We all had a common understanding of when we're going to move things out of each project. When we make that decision, we as professionals are saying, we don't think high school 7 is going to happen. So we're going to bring, that's one of the changes we're making, right? We're going to bring that to you and say, we want to put that in savings. It's just moving there. It gives us the flexibility to respond to our needs, whatever those may be. But that, even those needs will come back to this board, like the turf. Yeah. That we just talked about down at Vandergrift High School on the football field. Those things will always go through the BOC and then come back to the board.
And I guess what I'm asking is, like, what if high school 7 doesn't move into savings? What if we wanted to make it a magnet program or magnet school? This is my question.
Okay.
I just don't know where that impetus comes from. Is it administration that has to want it to be a magnet school before it moves? Is it your bond committee that has to want to make it a magnet school before? Where's the impetus, right? What is the one that starts that discussion? And we don't need an answer tonight. I just want to understand the process of what gets something moving, and then at what point are we seeing it, right? Is it all the way down the line that administration said they needed this, they discussed it with bond, and then at the end, once they all like it, then we see that there's going to be a magnet school for high school 7, right? I just want to make sure I understand, because when we're talking about we're going to pivot and we're going to adjust, okay, but when does the pivot and adjust happen, and at what point are we going in there? Just
I think
in general.
Yeah, I know you're not looking for an answer, but I guess I'm going to give it a shot. I think it depends on what it is. The impetus for the turf at Vandergrift High School was safety. We were told we're not going to be able to have kids playing on this anymore if we don't replace this. But this innovative programming committee may come up with some ideas that we think attract students back to our schools, that we need to use some of these bond dollars to pay for repurposing of a building, remodeling, addition to a building. So it may come out from there. And that is even another direction from the board in the resolution of, we want you to look into innovative program and how are we marketing, all those things. So that's another impetus, but it happens in a slightly different way. But it all comes back through the BOC and to the board before any decisions are made outside of what was already approved from the voters, and right?
Yes.
But you're talking about maybe the innovation committee thinks of something.
Okay.
And then it goes to bond oversight, is what you're saying, before it'll come to us, right? But my question is, but we have a CFAC going right now. So then when does that group? I mean, I'm still again trying to figure out the flow of information. There's a lot of things that are moving and changing. We're talking about the fact that we have to think of education different and marketing different. Again, I don't need a decision. There's just, who's the impetus? Who is the one? And so is innovation committee the only one that's allowed to kick off that discussion? Or, I don't know. So that was just, I'll leave it there. One of the things I do want to answer your question on interpreting board's intent. I think we're really, really close. I love your thoughts of putting in the guardrails. I don't see anything in there that is aligning with the board academic goals. And I get it that it's kind of hard to make turf align to increasing our reading goal. So there's a challenge there. But at some point, if we adopt constraints, maybe that does play into it. But I do think when we're thinking overall of the facilities, when we're thinking overall of the money we're spending, what are we really doing to emphasize our academic goals for our students and for me, enrollment? How are we bringing in enrollment? So.
Yeah, I'm also wondering, to that point, and Dr. Clark, you brought it up earlier, it's like that the strategic levers analysis, that we use that for many things. Because when we look at the resolution and those two statements tied really directly to how it impacts M&O and INS, right? But if you start looking at different frameworks and the lever analysis, that's when you get to, right? So you start folding in the student experience, the staff experience, and things like that. And so this is very specific to just the financial impact, which we want to bring in front of you. But I think we need to be looking at student and staff and stewardship and sustainability as well when we do talk about subjects. And it may be very broad application, right? Like turf, but that does tie to student experience, right? And so I think we would like to be more intentional about bringing those forward when we have those conversations as well, not just from a financial standpoint as well, just trying to tie as much together as we can.
That makes sense. And then on 2 for level of analysis, is this appropriate when evaluating initiatives? I'm still always going to want to know what were the voices involved, right? I've always thought site-based committee is the one that talks about right there what's on their campus, but I also know we have a CFAC. So when we're talking about the level of analysis of what you're bringing to us, just who were the voices? What was the process in it? I don't necessarily need to know all, that we met with 40 different but do we have a system? Do we have a process in place? And then my question on bond savings is have we thought of a potential of doing another layer of bond savings that's a savings just for major maintenance? In other words, not this big bond savings pool, but a certain specific that just will cover some. And it's not about covering all of major, it's just for those uh-ohs that happen. We did it when COVID happened. We took our fund balance and we put some COVID aside in fund balance just for the emergency.
Yeah, and I believe, I wasn't involved, but my understanding is that we had savings within the 2007 bond that actually were reallocated and pushed into the 2017 bond. So in the 2017 bond, we have a line item, I believe it's around $8 million for major maintenance items that come up that aren't part of a major renovation and kind of a singleton type projects. So we do have that, and I think that's smart. I can't take credit for it, but it has helped us, let me put it that way, in bridging between bonds.
Board members?
Can we just restate the feedback? I want to make sure we're clear. I know you were jotting some things down too, but what I'm hearing is clarity around tying a little, maybe if we includes, can you go back to the tables?
Yeah.
These somewhere including a relation to board goals or constraints or something along those lines. And then there was a second comment about, I just want to make sure we get.
Yeah, I think it just how did it surface, and what are those gates, right?
And who all's involved? Who all's
who's
at the
been
table?
involved in the
What was
conversation before it
process?
comes to you, kind of thing.
Yeah, but who were the voices and what was that process?
Yes.
For conducting the analysis?
Okay.
Okay.
Can we get that in a Friday memo, please?
Absolutely, yeah. We'll work on that.
Yeah, I think we could do some work to this and
Yeah.
bring it back. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Jeremy, as we move forward, one of the things that we talked about was, legislature is making so many changes. And in addition to those changes, it impacts how we don't over levy INS. And so when we'd see our traditional bond ratings that we got, which means how much money we're spending on the debt that we're borrowing, our taxpayers are spending for us, we were able to enjoy, I would say, a specific rate because of that over levy. That's not there anymore. And so I just want to be aware of how our rating may be impacted based on what we're moving into savings, what we're not moving into savings, or how our fund balance is, because that also impacts what the dollar is doing. And so that's going to be really important as we move forward.
Great point. Yeah, thank you.
Any other feedback? I guess I'll give mine. I think you did great. I like this, the number one, I do like the way the process we're doing this, because I feel like it keeps board members out of the weeds, and you're not gonna have a bond oversight committee or board members saying, hey, I want this project, right? Like, there's an actual system and process to it, and I think it tying to long-range plan, we won't have a bunch of these one-offs happening, and it'll be intentional, right? If we're going to actually build a new build, or we're gonna repurpose something. That I appreciate. I feel like there's more process and clarity and transparency than we've ever had, so I appreciate that. But I do want to hear about this process.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Board members, any other questions? No other questions? Fantastic. If not, you know where to go. Please CC Dr. Clark. If you have any other questions, that would be fantastic, y'all. All righty. Oh my goodness. Can I just say, board members and administration, thank y'all so much. I can't believe I'm saying this, for an actual decent, fun board workshop. So I appreciate y'all putting the time and effort and getting this board prepared for this meeting. It is night and day from last year, so I can't stress, thank y'all so much. Thank you. And with that said, it is 9:36 p.m. We have no other business. We are adjourned. Boom.